Chen Linfeng gently eased the control lever of the U-23 engineering vehicle into neutral, bringing the six-wheeled transport truck to a precise halt in the docking bay of Airlock 3. Docking complete. Commencing airtightness check. A cool, clear female voice sounded in the helmet's built-in earphones. The voice of the artificial intelligence, Annie. Copy. Chen Linfeng replied, his voice carrying a faint rasp from prolonged extravehicular activity. He deftly unfastened his safety harness and rolled his stiff neck to loosen it. 8 continuous hours of driving across the lunar surface, even with an anti-gravity buffering system, still imposed a heavy strain on the body. He had once been a gold medal pilot of the Chinese Air Force, his body long accustomed to all manner of extreme environments. Yet the loneliness and eternal silence of the moon were things no training on Earth could ever truly simulate. Through the wide cockpit viewport, Earth hung in the distance, like a colossal sapphire suspended in inky void swathed in spiraling white clouds, the contours of its continents clearly visible. He could vaguely discern the outline of a rooster. That was home, the symbol of life, the only warmth in this moment within a world of desolation. Annie, report the status of the supplies entering storage. Chen Linfeng spoke as he disengaged the intricate connectors of his extravehicular suit and walked toward the equipment area. Commander, all 12 construction modules have been taken over by engineering robots and are being transported to the warehouse zone as scheduled. The manifest crosscheck is error-free. Material integrity stands at 100. Annie's reply came at once, efficient and precise as always. In addition, the ground control center has sent confirmation. This transport mission has been rated as excellent. The corners of Chen Linfeng's mouth twitched faintly. That was his response. He removed the heavy extravehicular suit and hung it in his designated locker, revealing the blue intravehicular work uniform beneath. On the left side of his chest, beside the bright 5-star red flag, were his nameplate and astronaut insignia, patched through to the encrypted communication channel with Earth personal priority. This was one of the few privileges he enjoyed during his lengthy lunar posting. Establishing connection. Connection established. Signal delay approximately 1.3 seconds. A few seconds later, an image appeared on the main screen of the living module. A little girl with twin pigtails and a radiant smile filled the entire display. Dad. The girl's voice was clear and full of energy. Hey, Ran. The severe lines on Chen Linfeng's face softened at once. Have you eaten yet? I have. Mom made my favorite sweet and sour ribs. Dad, when are you coming home? You promised to celebrate my birthday with me. She counted on her fingers. It's only 1 week until my birthday. He tried to keep his voice steady. 3 days from now, once Dad finishes his work on the moon, I'll fly back and celebrate your birthday with you, all right? Really? Pinky swear. His daughter stretched a small finger toward the far side of the screen. Smiling, Chen Linfeng extended his own little finger, and across more than a second of delay, father and daughter completed this promise spanning 3.0 kilometers. Feng, is everything still going smoothly? His wife's gaze held concern and a longing she could not conceal. Smoothly. I just finished a transport mission. Is everything fine at home? As Chen Linfeng looked at his wife, a wave of guilt welled up in his heart. We're fine. It's just that Ran keeps talking about you. Out there on your own, you must pay attention to safety, eat on time, and get proper sleep, his wife reminded him softly. Don't worry, Annie takes good care of me, Chen Linfeng replied with a small smile. The base is very safe. Once this construction mission is complete, I'll have a long vacation. Annie's voice sounded with gentle reminder. Commander, the scheduled communication period is about to end. We need to free bandwidth for the next data exchange window. Got it. Chen Linfeng nodded, turning to the screen. Ran, darling, I have to get back to work. In 3 days when I return to Earth, don't you dare stand me up. Goodbye, Dad. Don't forget, okay? Goodbye. Take care of yourself. The screen dimmed to black. Chen Linfeng walked to the window and fixed his gaze on the blue planet. He could clearly make out the coastline of East Asia. That was where his roots lay. Any connect to Beijing. Establishing connection. The communication indicator light flickered, signaling that the transmission was piercing through the void between Earth and Moon. Chen Linfeng straightened his collar, preparing to begin his report. Suddenly, outside the window, a blinding white point of light erupted on Earth, swelling without the slightest warning. It was not lightning, not aurora, nor any natural phenomenon or human-made light within his realm of understanding. It was like a venomous fong gestated in the depths of hell, violently piercing through Earth's tranquil blue veil. Then came a second, a third, a fourth. Dozens of the same horrifying white points flared across different corners of Earth, ignited one after another, exploding outward and bleaching everything around them, along with the deep night sky, into a ghastly pallor. Death-like silence first blossomed inside Chen Linfeng's skull, devouring all sound. In his earphones, the channel that linked him to his homeland suddenly erupted. It was no longer clear, steady instructions, nor the familiar voices of colleagues, but had turned into a boiling stew of despairing static and fractured noise. Repeat, global, under nuclear attack. The frantic Chinese exclamation lasted barely half a second. Sla. Hello. Beijing. If you can hear me, respond. Ranran, can you hear me? Chen Linfeng lunged toward the control console, frantically cycling through every available channel as he screamed into the microphone, his fingers pressing so hard that his knuckles blanched. There was no reply, not on a single channel. Annie's eternally calm voice echoed through the dead-quiet living module, its composure chilling to the bone, warning multiple source high-intensity energy eruptions detected on a global scale. Spectral characteristics are consistent with nuclear fission-fusion reactions. All Earth-Moon communication signals have been cut off. Attempting all backup links, connection failed. Commander, we have lost contact with Earth. No. Impossible. His throat was parched, producing only a hoarse rasp. He suddenly sprang up from the floor, the violent motion sending a wave of vertigo through him, so fierce, he almost collapsed again. Stumbling, he lunged toward the main control console. His fingers trembled violently from fear and urgency, so unsteady, he could barely tap the screen with any accuracy. Reconnect. Annie, re-establish every channel for me. All backup frequencies. Deep space networks. Try every possible method. His voice carried a shrillness even he did not recognize. Attempting to re-establish connection. Scanning all known communication protocols. Signal strength at 0. Background radiation levels abnormally elevated, interference severe. All connection attempts failed. Annie's reply was icy and swift. Each failed, landing like Chen Linfeng refused to accept it. He violently cycled through bands. Public emergency channels, military encrypted channels, international astronautic cooperation frequencies. He even tried several civilian broadcast bands. In his headset, there was nothing but that unchanging hiss of electrical white noise, the sound of absolute void. No distress calls, no orders, no music, no news. Nothing at all. The electromagnetic roar of human civilization had been completely erased. In terms of radio waves, Earth had become a dead star. Ranran. Xiaoman. He murmured hopelessly, whispering the names of his wife and daughter. His fingers slid unconsciously over the console and called up the private communication interface. The familiar avatar was now gray, the last call record frozen at less than an hour ago. He hammered the call button again and again, but the system returned only a red error prompt, connection timed out. Once, twice, 10 times. He was like a maddened, trapped beast, slamming himself again and again against an invisible cage. Sweat seeped from his forehead, running down his temples and dripping onto the control panel. A vast terror and despair seized him. His stomach cramped violently. He gagged dryly, yet nothing came out. Beijing. If you hear this, respond. This is the Tranquility C base on the moon. Is anyone there? Anyone hearing this, please respond. He screamed into the microphone, his voice echoing through the empty module, sounding pathetically weak and absurd. The only reply was Annie's calm report. Commander, transmission power is normal, but no response signals from Earth can be detected. Based on the energy burst model, Earth's surface communication infrastructure has with high probability suffered catastrophic damage. Commander, a fragmentary, heavily interfered residual signal has been received. Signal source analysis. Origin redundant channel of our beta system. Attempting amplification and decoding. Chen Linfeng snapped his head up, a faint spark of hope igniting in his eyes. A harsher, more fragmented static screeched in his headset, as though it might vanish completely at any moment. Yet in the gaps between the noise, he caught an extremely faint, heavily distorted, but barely recognizable fragment of a human voice speaking Chinese. Any. Recipients. Units. Report. Shrill interference. Repeat. Global. Entering. Highest. State. Chen Linfeng held his breath. Then a single word, laden with grim resolve, the syllables trembling as if shouted with the last of someone's strength, cut through the interference. Seed of fire. After that brief moment of clarity came a final roar of static, the signal raging one last time before annihilation. Immediately afterward, at the instant the noise dropped to its lowest point, another word burdened with indescribable sorrow and hope struck his eardrums. Annie. I am here, Commander. Analyze the last received signal fragment. Seed of fire. Command confirmed. Analysis in progress. Final directive, devote all efforts to constructing the lunar base. His legs were still weak, but he remained standing. He walked to the console, his figure bathed in the glow of the screens looked solitary, but no longer hunched. Annie. His voice was still hoarse, yet it had become the voice of a calm, decisive commander once more. I am here, Commander. Call up the full three-dimensional structural diagram of the Tranquility C base system, highest clearance. Initiate the Seed of Fire Emergency Protocol Database Authorization, code, Hongqi, 7 Linfeng. Authorization validated. Seed of Fire Protocol Database unlocked. Full system structural diagram now displayed. The enormous holographic screen flared to life, unfurling a far more complex and detailed map of the base. Every subsystem, from the core fusion reactor to the outermost sensor, was rendered with crystalline clarity. Annie ran a comprehensive self-diagnostic on all external monitoring sensors, including optical telescope spectrometers, and high-energy particle detectors. I need precise data on the physical changes occurring at Earth's surface, not merely projections. Command confirmed. Self-diagnostics initiated. Estimated completion time 15 minutes. Now report the core survival parameters of the base: energy, oxygen, water, food. Use the most pessimistic estimation models. His fingers slid across the virtual interface, summoning real-time data windows for each critical system. Reporting Commander, the Suan-Rinchi fusion reactor is stable output power at 98.7. Helium-3 fuel reserves at current consumption rate can theoretically sustain operations for 8.9 Earth years. Oxygen cycle systems, hydroponic farms, plus chemical regeneration operating at 98.5 efficiency. Existing water stores and recycling capacity, assuming no external resupply, can support a single crew member for 4.1 years. Standard nutrient reserves and emergency rations can sustain 2.3 years. Seed bank integrity, nominal dormancy rate 99.8. The chill of those numbers traced out a clear, yet unforgiving boundary for survival. Chen Linfeng listened in silence, his mind racing, mapping each figure onto the base's structural diagram. Where were the weak links? Where could optimization be made? Which devices required priority maintenance? He turned away, no longer looking at that heartbreaking planet, but instead facing the empty habitation module and the control nexus that embodied the entire base. Clear-voiced and unwavering, he declared, "Final directive confirmed. From this moment on, Chen Linfeng will execute the Seed of Fire plan." Command confirmed, Commander. Annie's response was immediate and efficient. On the holographic screen alongside a complex diagram of the base's structure, a simple list began to generate rapidly, each item marked with a priority level, P1 being the highest, and so on, and estimated time. Chen Linfeng sat down in front of the control console, his back straight, his gaze sweeping over the first piece of information like a scanner. Personal emotions were forcibly suppressed deep within his heart. The person sitting at the control console now was astronaut Chen Linfeng, soldier Chen Linfeng, Commander Chen Linfeng. P1 task: comprehensive system diagnostics and status solidification. Objective: ensure all core systems of the base are operating at optimal condition and eliminate any potential malfunction risks. Content: 1. Energy system deep self-check. Inspect all pipelines, magnetic confinement devices, and energy conversion efficiency of the Suan fusion reactor. Estimated time 4 hours. 2. Life support system redundancy test. Activate and test all backup oxygen generation, carbon dioxide absorption, and water circulation units. Estimated time 6 hours. 3. Environmental control and defense system verification. Check air pressure, temperature, radiation, shielding integrity, and validate emergency response procedures for solar storms and other extreme space conditions. Estimated time 3 hours. Agreed. Chen Linfeng confirmed without hesitation. Initiate the P1 task queue immediately. Annie, you are responsible for coordinating all automated diagnostic programs. I need a detailed report marking any even minor performance degradation or potential risk points. Understood. Diagnostic program has been initiated. A deep and orderly humming sound filled the base, the noise of various detection devices, starting up valves, switching, and system self-checks. Now Annie, give me a detailed inventory list. Categories: construction modules, maintenance, spare parts, scientific instruments, and all consumables. As he spoke the last few words, his throat tightened slightly, but his voice remained steady. A large amount of data flowed instantly onto the screen. Construction modules. 3rd generation living module expansion unit X2 not deployed. Large hydroponic farm expansion unit X1 not deployed. Small research module X1 not deployed. Spare solar panel array folded state. Lunar exploration vehicle spare energy packs X3. Maintenance spare parts. Various specifications of alloy plates, pressure materials. 3D printing metal powder, reserves titanium, aluminum, high-performance alloys. Electronic component library, chips, cables, sensors. Mechanical parts library, bearings, gears, robotic arm replacements. Scientific instruments. Geological sampling and analysis kit. Astronomical observation equipment. Life science experimental equipment. Food reserves. Standard space nutritional meal packs can sustain one person for 420 Earth days. High-energy emergency compressed food can sustain one person for 180 Earth days. Current output from the hydroponic farm: leafy vegetables, algae, minimal, only sufficient for nutritional supplementation. C. Chen Linfeng's gaze lingered longest on the food reserves section. About 2 years' worth. This number felt like a cold ruler measuring the limit of his survival. The output of the hydroponic farm is critical and must be expanded as soon as possible. Any calculate how long we can extend our food self-sufficiency cycle if we expand the existing hydroponic farm to its maximum design capacity and successfully cultivate the main crops. Calculating. Considering the extended growth cycle due to lunar conditions, if the agricultural expansion plan is successful, the sustainable food supply is expected to be extended to 5.8 years or more. but this depends on the adequate supply of energy, water, and nutrients. 5. 8 years, a number that offered a slight respite. But this meant that agricultural expansion must be prioritized. Next, the inventory list for vehicles and external equipment. Lunar vehicles. U-2-3 lunar rover in good condition, basic maintenance completed after the last lunar drive, with a range of about 200 kilometers. Engineering robots X2 can be remotely controlled or programmed for operations responsible for external construction maintenance and sampling. Extravehicular spacesuits X2, main suit and backup suit, both have passed safety inspections. Looking at the status report of the U-2-3, Chen Linfeng recalled the recent mission to the Shackleton crater to collect water ice. At that time, it was for experimental oxygen production. Now it had turned into a matter of life and death. Water is a more urgent resource than food. Annie marked the water ice-rich area at the edge of the Shackleton crater as Resource Point 1. We need to develop a regular safe water ice collection operation procedure. Marked. It is recommended to prioritize water ice collection as a P2 task. Agreed. Chen Linfeng continued to browse the list, his mind racing, transforming these cold items into chips for survival. Every bolt, every gram of fuel, every seed could be a decisive factor at a critical moment in the future. His gaze finally settled on the seed bank inventory. Wheat, rice. The symbolic weight of these crops felt overwhelmingly heavy at this moment. They are the crystallization of human civilization. Now he is their guardian. At that moment, Annie's voice sounded again. Commander, the preliminary results of the external sensor self-check have. The optical telescope observed that multiple areas of the Earth's surface are covered by large-scale dust clouds consistent with the characteristics of massive ground explosions. Global atmospheric optical transparency has sharply decreased. High-energy particle detectors reported a significant increase in background radiation levels, but it has not yet reached a level that poses a direct threat to lunar activities. Chen Linfeng operated the control console, switching the telescope's view to the main screen. That blue planet now resembled a ball wrapped in a dirty veil, with the contours of the continents blurred, only the residual halos of nuclear explosion points faintly shining through the dust clouds like festering wounds. He stared at the image for a few seconds, his face showing no emotion. Then he turned off the image. Data recorded. Continue executing the P1 diagnostic tasks. He calmly issued the order, his voice betraying no emotion. He turned away from the screen and directed his gaze toward the base layout map on the cabin wall. His finger pointed to the position of the fusion reactor at the core of the base, then traced the pipeline leading to the hydroponic farm, and finally landed on the symbols representing the external airlock and the lunar surface. Annie, after completing the P1 tasks, prioritized the inspection of the hydroponic farm expansion units and external water ice collection equipment. Additionally, I need a detailed lunar map marking all known mineral deposits and potential safe landing spots. Command recorded. The P1 level system diagnosis is complete. All core systems are functioning well with redundant units on standby. 3 instances of non-critical sensor reading deviations have been recorded, but they do not affect the main functionality. Annie's voice echoed within the living pod, marking the end of the uninterrupted system self-check that had lasted for several hours. Chen Linfeng nodded slightly in front of the holographic control panel. The diagnostic results were better than expected. This silent sea base resembled a finely crafted interstellar arc, maintaining its structural integrity even after the storm. But that was not enough. Survival cannot rely solely on the existing stock. It also requires growth. His gaze shifted to the center of the base's structural diagram, to the area marked as heart. The Swerin tokamak device, a miniaturized nuclear fusion reactor. It is the energy source of the base and the cornerstone of all future plans. Without it, all expansion and construction would be like drawing water from a dry well. Annie, report the current status of the Swerin and the final checklist before startup. Chen Linfeng's voice was steady, imbued with a focus typical of someone executing a critical task. Reporting, Commander. The Swerin is currently in a safe standby mode with the magnetic confinement maintained, and the plasma chamber is in a vacuum state. The final checklist before startup is as follows. Holographic screen displayed a long list of complex technical items: superconducting magnet coil status and cooling system verification, liquid helium circulation, pump pressure, temperature, and flow. First wall material integrity scan confirmed that the inner wall, which withstands high-temperature plasma, has no damage or peeling. Fuel injection system calibration. Check the deuterium-tritium fuel pellet supply line and injection precision. Energy conversion system, thermoelectric direct conversion efficiency validation. Central control program self-check and safety interlock confirmation. Energy is our only capital for survival here and even for returning to Earth in the future. Chen Linfeng seemed to be speaking to himself, or perhaps explaining to Annie. He took a deep breath as if trying to expel all distracting thoughts. Begin executing the final confirmation procedures item by item. Annie, you lead, and I will monitor the data stream in sync. Understood. Initiating the final confirmation procedure sequence. Chen Linfeng's eyes were fixed on various parameters, his fingers flying across the virtual keyboard, calling up different monitoring windows. The scrolling data stream on the screen was dizzyingly fast, yet he was able to precisely capture even the slightest fluctuations. Years of training and flying experience had given him an almost instinctive sense for monitoring complex systems. The temperature of the superconducting magnet coils is stable at 4.2 Ka and the magnetic field strength has reached 99.8 of the preset value stable. Check passed. First wall infrared scan completed, no abnormal hotspots or structural damage detected. Check passed. Fuel injection system calibration completed, target pellets in position. Check passed. Each notification of check passed deepened the tense atmosphere in the pod. This was not merely the initiation of an energy device, it felt more like unlocking the shackles of a sleeping giant, necessitating extreme caution. All pre-checks have passed. Commander, do you authorize the loading of the startup sequence? Annie's voice remained calm, but the question weighed heavily. Chen Linfeng did not respond immediately. He took one last look at a small window beside the main screen, which displayed real-time optical images from Earth. Though most areas were shrouded in dust clouds, only a blurry halo remained. He closed his eyes. When he opened his eyes again, only absolute calmness and determination remained in his gaze. Authorize the loading of the startup sequence. Execute manual control, and key nodes await my confirmation commands. He could not relinquish everything to automation, especially at such a moment. He needed to hold on to control to feel the process. Startup sequence has been loaded. Countdown begins 10, 9, 8. Chen Linfeng's hand hovered over the red final ignition button, which required dual verification. 3, 2, 1. Plasma generation program initiated. On the screen, the internal diagram representing the reactor core lit up as simulated deuterium-tritium gas was injected into the vacuum chamber. Immediately afterward, powerful RF wave energy began to inject, and the section representing the gas became bright and active. Neutral particle injection complete. Heating phase. RF wave heating power increasing. Data curves began to oscillate violently with temperature and pressure readings rapidly climbing. Plasma temperature has reached 10 million Kelvin. Magnetic confinement stable. Central density has reached critical value. The entire living pod seemed to quiet down with only the faint sound of instruments running and the heartbeat echoing in the chest. The critical moment had arrived. Commander, the plasma has been successfully ignited and reached a preliminary stable state. Do you authorize sustained burning and connection to the main power grid? Annie prompted. Chen Linfeng took a deep breath, pressing his thumb heavily on the red button while stating firmly, authorize. Command confirmed. Energy output is smoothly increasing. 5, 20, 50. The curve representing the base's total energy consumption maintained at a lower level, but now another curve representing the Swerin energy output, like a waking dragon, surged powerfully and unrestrainedly upward, quickly surpassing the consumption line. 100. Output power stabilizing at rated value. Buzz. A more pronounced and deeper vibration emanated from the floor, no longer the isolated operation of a system, but the entire base's pulse had become strong and vigorous. The lighting in the living pod returned to its previous brightness, even more stable than before. On the control panel, nearly all system status indicators glowed with a healthy green light. The Swerin fusion reactor is running steadily. Output power at 100. Successfully connected to the base's main power grid. It worked. Chen Linfeng slowly retracted his hand, finally feeling the sweat that had seeped from his palm due to tension. He took a step back, watching the stable operating curve on the screen, observing the base's energy reserve percentage steadily climbing from its previously cautious maintenance. This was not just the reactor being activated. This was igniting an indomitable flame belonging to humanity on the silent moon. He did not cheer, nor did he display any evident joy on his face. The taut line of his jaw softened slightly. He raised his hand and gently patted the cold control panel, as if patting the shoulder of a reliable comrade. Record Lunar Standard Time, the Swerin nuclear fusion reactor has successfully restarted and is operating at full capacity. The base's energy crisis has been resolved. He calmly issued the command. Recorded. Chen Linfeng shifted his gaze away from the energy curve graph, turning to the next task on the to-do list. With the energy issue temporarily resolved, the next survival hurdle is just ahead. Annie, he spoke, his voice carrying a hint of fatigue, but more so a firm determination. Prepare. The next priority task is to fetch water. The steady hum of the Swerin clan resonated akin to the pulsating heartbeat of the newly formed base, faintly transmitted through the alloyed deck. The energy crisis was temporarily alleviated, yet the countdown for survival remained unceasing, its ticking sound becoming clearer and more urgent under the stable energy supply. Electricity could be nearly infinite, but the circulation system required water, and hydroponic farms needed water. Every cell in his body craved water. At the Jinghai base, this magnificent metal island still floated in a barren desert devoid of resources. Chen Linfeng stood in the equipment area beside the airlock, his gaze calmly fixed on the U-2-3 lunar rover. This multipurpose vehicle was no longer merely a means of transportation, it was an extension of his limbs, the only vessel venturing into the sea of death. The last time he drove it was before the nuclear explosion, transporting those space station modules that now seemed painfully ironic. Now the mission was entirely different, not to build a future, but to seize the present, extracting the source of life from the moon's eternal shadows. Annie, he began, his voice resonating clearly in the empty cabin. Pull up the latest terrain scan data for resource point 1, overlay it with historical exploration records, and identify potential risk areas. What he sought was not an idealized map, but a battle sandbox as close to the harsh reality as possible. Data has been integrated. Annie responded, the holographic projection instantly unfolding, presenting a high-precision 3D model of the Shackleton crater's terrain. The target area was marked in an enticing blue, indicating rich ice deposits surrounded by steep crater walls, dense impact crater remnants, and a shadowy zone labeled as regolith liquefaction risk area. A winding virtual route was delineated, avoiding the most dangerous sections, but consequently adding nearly 20 kilometers to the journey. Route risk assessment. Chen Linfeng inquired, his finger tracing the convoluted line. Estimated one-way journey is 41 kilometers. The maximum slope does not exceed 15 degrees, avoiding known areas of deep, loose lunar soil. The primary risks are navigation signals may weaken near the crater walls, temperatures in the permanent shadow areas drop below -200 degrees Celsius, posing extreme challenges for equipment, and the ever-present probability of micrometeorite impacts. That's acceptable. Plan according to this route. Chen Linfeng approved of the cautious plan. Speed was insignificant in the face of safety. He approached the U-2-3, commencing the most tedious yet crucial step before his expedition, pre-launch checks. This process was rigid and repetitive, allowing for no margin of error. Every extravehicular activity was a brush with death, and the quality of preparation directly influenced the distance of that brush. He first circled the U-2-3 slowly, like a seasoned cavalryman inspecting his steed. The beam of the powerful flashlight meticulously scanned each massive mesh tire, checking if the tread was embedded with sharp lunar rock fragments. His eyes swept over every inch of the vehicle's alloy shell, looking for any potential, however minor, dents or stress fractures. He opened the side inspection panel, checking the voltage balance of the battery pack, the tightness of circuit connections, and listened for any strange noises from the drive motors while idling. U-2-3, initiate full system self-check. He entered the cockpit and pressed the sequence button. Data cascaded down the control screen: power, navigation, communications, temperature control. Every parameter had to remain firmly within the green zone. At this moment, the U-2 was his only lifeline. Vehicle self-check passed. All systems are functioning well, and he confirmed. Next was the extravehicular suit. He treated the bulky spacesuit as if it were a sacred robe, removing it from the rack, meticulously feeling and pressing it, assessing the elasticity of the pressure layers, and checking for any potential damage in the multi-layered composite materials. The helmet's visor was spotless, inspected for any minute scratches that could impair visibility. The life support backpack on his back was crucial, with oxygen levels, carbon dioxide scrubbers, battery life, and liquid cooling circulation system. He repeatedly verified each gauge and valve. This suit was his armor in the vacuum, a self-contained mobile island of life. Lastly, there were tools: geological drill, sample sealing jars, various sizes of wrenches, and cutting tools, emergency signal gun, spare oxygen tanks. Each item was picked up, inspected, tested, then neatly arranged in the loading area beside the lunar rover. Most importantly, there was that high-strength synthetic fiber safety tether. He securely fastened one end to the reinforced anchor point inside the lunar rover, connecting the other end to the waist loop of his extravehicular suit. This tether was the fragile, yet solid umbilical cord between him and the base, the only means of crawling back to the U-2 in a dire situation. With everything in place, the equipment silently awaited, exuding the cold aura of metal and composite materials. Chen Linfeng returned to the main control console, pulling up the overall monitoring overview of the base. All systems operated smoothly, the green data pulsing rhythmically like breathing. His gaze swept once more over the corner, displaying the image of Earth, still only a blur of light, like a piece of dust-covered glass. Silently, he closed all non-essential interfaces, leaving only the data pertinent to the mission and the communication channel with Annie. Annie, his voice carried a metallic resonance through the Suntobi closed visor. Once I leave the base, we'll enter low-power, autonomous mode. Your top priority is to ensure the absolute safety of the base. No non-core systems are to be activated without my direct command or preset emergency protocols. Instruction confirmed. Base autonomy mode activated. I will guard the home commander. Annie's response was calm, but carried an undeniable firmness. Chen Linfeng took a deep breath of the air filtered through the base's circulation system, imbued with metallic and ozone scents, as if to store this safety essence in his lungs. He glanced at the personal terminal displaying the mission countdown and emergency plan. Mission objective: ice collection. Estimated duration: 12 standard hours. He seemed to be completing a ritual. If the predetermined return time exceeds 24 hours and there is no active communication, execute the Guardian Protocol. The Guardian Protocol means that Annie will determine the commander has perished and will autonomously maintain base operations indefinitely, awaiting the faint possibility of a follow-up that is nearly non-existent. The Guardian Protocol is in place. Annie paused, her voice seemingly carrying a slight imperceptible fluctuation beyond program parameters. May the path ahead be clear, Commander. Chen Linfeng did not respond further. He last checked the seal of his visor, then turned and decisively stepped into the already opened inner airlock. The heavy hatch slowly closed behind him, completely isolating the light and sound of the living area. Before him was the equally heavy second door, behind which lay the moon's merciless vacuum and desolation. He steadied himself, feeling the subtle pressure change as the air in the airlock was rapidly evacuated until everything fell into absolute silence. Only his breathing echoed within the helmet. The outer lock gate slowly slid open and the sight of the lunar surface rushed forth, an inky velvet sky, blinding sunlight, and the incredibly clear, detailed, gray-white wasteland extending to the jagged edge of the horizon. He walked step by step towards the already activated low-rumbling U-23, the safety tether unfurling slowly behind him. Entering the cockpit, he closed the hatch, restoring pressure. U-23 set off. He spoke calmly into the communicator. U-23 acknowledges. Navigation. The massive lunar rover slowly rolled away from the base docking bay, 6 giant mesh wheels crunching over the fine lunar soil, leaving 2 distinct tracks as it headed towards the deep shadowy lands in the distance. A solitary sail, now a distant silhouette against the azure sky. The U-23 resembled a silent giant of steel gliding steadily across the surface of the moon. The enormous web-like wheels crushed the fine lunar soil, raising a slow drifting haze. In the low-gravity and vacuum environment, the dust fell with an extraordinary elegance, yet carried a sense of deathly slowness. Chen Linfeng sat in the cockpit, his body swaying slightly with the vehicle's gentle bumps as it traversed over small lunar ridges. The world outside the visor was an absolute contrast of black and white. Where the sunlight struck, the outlines of all objects were sharp enough to cut the eyes. The shadows of the rocks were as dense as ink, with no soft transitions brought about by atmospheric scattering. Stars flickered coldly against the pitch-black velvet backdrop, unblinking and unwavering, eternal and indifferent. In his ears, only the sound of his own rhythmic breathing and the low hum of the vehicle's motor filled the silence. Annie maintained her silence, only speaking when he inquired or when the system had specific status reports, aiming to minimize interference with the driver. This extreme silence was deeper than the quietude within the base's living quarters. In the base, he could at least sense the presence of a container, but here he was completely exposed in the vacuum of the universe, with the only shelter being the thin layer of his spacesuit and the metallic shell of the U-2. He drove along the predetermined route, with the navigation system faithfully guiding his way. His gaze swept across the various readings on the control panel: speed, power consumption, external temperature, 127 degrees Celsius in the sunlight, plummeting to minus 173 degrees in the shadows, radiation levels. Everything was normal. However, most of his attention was focused on the desolate landscape extending outside the porthole. He had once thought the lunar base was an island, but now he truly understood what a wasteland was. As far as the eye could see, there were craters large and small stacked upon one another, recording billions of years of lifeless impact history. There was no sign of weathering, no erosion from flowing water, only the most primal and violent geological structures. Here time seemed frozen. Aside from the occasional falling micrometeorite, there was nearly no change. A sense of indescribable smallness intertwined with a strange pride of being a human representative venturing into this ancient wasteland. Chen Linfeng might be the only conscious being on this entire planet at this moment. This thought brought not a sense of superiority, but a heavy, almost suffocating loneliness. To dispel this emotion, he actively broke the communications silence. Annie, report relative position and estimated arrival time. Commander, we have traveled 28 kilometers. Currently, we are located southwest relative to the base. We expect to reach the edge of the resource point 1 in 1 hour and 47 minutes. Received. Continue monitoring the surrounding environment with a focus on any unusual geological activity signals or non-natural signals. Understood. Environmental monitoring is ongoing and no anomalies have been detected. As he passed the halfway point, he began to approach the outer edge of the Shackleton crater. The terrain started to undulate, with the slope gradually increasing. U-23's powerful suspension system handled it effortlessly, but Chen Linfeng reduced the speed, becoming more cautious. He maneuvered around a boulder the size of a house. The wheels occasionally slipped on the soft slope, and the traction control system immediately intervened to stabilize the vehicle. As he crossed a steep escarpment, the vehicle tilted slightly, and Chen Linfeng instinctively tightened his grip on the handrail. At that moment, the image of his daughter Nyo wearing a birthday hat and smiling with eyes that curved like crescent moons abruptly flashed in his mind. "Daddy promised me." That clear voice seemed to echo right beside him. His heart jerked sharply as if gripped by a cold hand. A thin layer of white mist instantly covered the breathing mask, quickly cleared by the defogging system. He blinked forcefully, trying to suppress the sudden surge of bitterness. He could not think about it. He must not think about it. He had to focus all his energy on driving. Any mistake could mean that Ran would lose her father forever, despite the fact that the world she needed him to return to may no longer exist. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to pull his attention back to the navigation line and the terrain map. Finally, after nearly 3 hours of driving, the U-23 climbed up a final ridge. Ahead, the scenery suddenly transformed. The enormous Shackleton crater lay before him, its interior a realm of eternal, unfathomable darkness, as if the universe had opened a colossal mouth. At the edge of the crater wall where sunlight met shadow, an extremely distinct and eerie line was formed. Outside the line was the sunlit, glaringly bright lunar soil. Inside was absolute darkness, one that seemed to swallow even the starlight. There lay Resource Point 1, a permanent shadow zone, the hiding place of water ice. The U-23 came to a stop on the ridge. Chen Linfeng operated the robotic arm to direct the vehicle's high-power spotlight toward the shadowed area. 2 massive beams of light pierced the darkness like 2 sharp swords. Where the light reached was not the smooth ice surface he had imagined, but rather the rugged ground still covered in thick lunar soil. Yet at the edges of the light, he could faintly see some areas reflecting a hazy white glow unlike ordinary lunar soil. Annie, activate the onboard spectrometer and scan the area 500 meters ahead. Scanning. Confirming that the surface materials in the target area contain significantly higher hydroxyl absorption peaks than background levels. Commander, we have found water ice, and it seems the reserves are closer to the surface than expected. Annie's voice seemed to carry a hint of barely detectable excitement. Success was within reach, but the most dangerous part was just beginning. Chen Linfeng needed to carefully drive the U-23 down the relatively steep crater wall into that cold realm of death. He checked the connection of the safety tether, confirmed that the spacesuit was in perfect condition, and then gripped the control stick tightly. "You two are going down," he whispered, as if to encourage himself or perhaps to announce the beginning of a battle. The U-23 moved cautiously like a giant beast, slowly navigating along the meticulously charted zigzag path into the shadowed region of the Shackleton crater. As the vehicle completely entered the area untouched by sunlight, the surrounding temperature plummeted. Even with a powerful temperature control system, Chen Linfeng could feel the bone-chilling cold from the instrument readings and the subtle sounds emanating from the vehicle. The external temperature displayed -203 degrees Celsius. This was the ice cellar of the solar system. Beyond the light, there was absolute darkness, thick as if it were a substance. Only the area illuminated by the headlights presented an eerie clarity. On the gray-white lunar soil lay a darker layer resembling frost. Where the wheels rolled, it was no longer soft dust, but instead produced a faint crisp sound of crushing, the noise of frozen volatiles and water ice being compacted. Core area of the target zone reached. Annie's voice broke the suffocating silence through the headset. The onboard radar shows a relatively flat area 50 meters ahead, suitable for parking operations. Received, Chen Linfeng replied, carefully bringing the vehicle to a stop. He checked the status of the external suits and life support system readings one last time. Everything was normal. Most importantly, he reconfirmed the safety tether connecting him to the lunar rover. Secure and taut, it was his guarantee of life. Prepare for extravehicular operations and continuously monitor the vehicle's status and the surrounding environment. Alert me immediately of any anomalies. Wishing you a smooth operation, Commander. As the inner airlock door closed, the vacuum pump began to work. Chen Linfeng could feel the changes in pressure until the instruments indicated a vacuum state. He pushed open the outer airlock door and stepped out of the U-23. The first step onto the shadowed lunar surface felt utterly different from that in the sunlit area. The ground beneath his feet was not soft, but rather hard with a slight brittleness to it. He walked to the back of the vehicle and operated the robotic arm to slowly lower the shallow drilling equipment. The drill bit shimmered coldly under the lights. He needed to collect samples from at least half a meter deep to avoid the surface materials that might be affected by solar wind. Drilling point coordinates confirmed, starting operations, he said into the communicator, simultaneously activating the drill. A deep vibration resonated through the lunar surface as the drill bit began to rotate slowly and steadily, cutting into the frozen lunar soil. The process was slow. The operational efficiency under the moon's low gravity was far inferior to that on Earth. Chen Linfeng patiently monitored the drilling depth, power, and real-time analysis data of the sample composition. Minutes later, the drilling depth reached 40 centimeters. A clear fluctuation appeared on the spectral curve of the analyzer. Commander real-time spectral analysis shows that the purity of the water ice in the current sampling layer has significantly increased, estimated to be between 8 and 10. And reported, Chen Linfeng's spirits lifted, stop drilling, prepare to extract the sample. He carefully operated the robotic arm to raise the drill pipe containing the sample. As the drill bit withdrew from the hole, he could see the retrieved lunar soil core sample sparkling with crystalline glimmers under the light, the water ice particles interspersed within. He skillfully transferred the sample to a specially designed, insulated, and cold-preserving sealed container. When the container lid clicked shut, a weight lifted slightly from his heart. The first sample successful. But the mission was far from over. He needed more samples to ensure the base had sufficient. He repositioned, preparing for the second drilling. Just as he selected a new point and started the drill, an unexpected incident occurred. After cutting about 30 centimeters, the drill bit suddenly encountered extreme resistance, accompanied by a piercing, metallic, grinding noise. The drill's power surged instantly, nearly triggering the overload protection to shut down. What happened? Chen Linfeng immediately halted operations. The drill bit appears to have encountered an unusually hard rock layer or metallic material, and quickly analyzed the data. The resistance far exceeds the estimated strength of the lunar soil. Chen Linfeng's brows furrowed. He carefully operated the robotic arm to raise the drill bit slightly, and used the helmet light to examine the interior of the drill hole closely. Amidst the shattered lunar soil and ice debris, he seemed to see an unnatural fragment reflecting metallic luster. This was not natural lunar rock. His heart raced with alarm. How could there be artificial metal in the subterranean depths of this moon's permanent shadow region? Was it debris from an early crashed probe? Or something else? And enhance and analyze the spectral characteristics of the metal fragment, he commanded, becoming more vigilant and scanning the surrounding darkness. In that thick, impenetrable darkness, it seemed to hide countless pairs of eyes. Analyzing. The spectral characteristics do not match any known common spacecraft alloy materials. The structure is extraordinarily dense. Unknown metal buried beneath the water ice-rich area. And record the current coordinates and mark it as anomaly point alpha. He suppressed the doubt in his heart and issued the command in as calm a tone as possible: prioritize completing the water ice collection task. Detailed analysis of the metal fragment will be carried out after returning to the base. Coordinates recorded and marked. It is recommended to conduct preliminary imaging at the current drilling location before moving to the backup sampling point, and responded. Chen Linfeng operated the robotic arm, adjusting the high-resolution camera on the drilling unit to capture multiple angles of the drill hole that sparkled with an unusual luster. After completing this, he cautiously raised the drill bit, completely, no longer attempting to penetrate that hard barrier. He sealed the mixed sample containing a small amount of metal debris and water ice separately and affixed a prominent warning label. Having finished all this, he maneuvered the U-23 to slowly move to a designated backup sampling point a few dozen meters away. The subsequent drilling process went much smoother, with no further unusual obstacles encountered. He successfully collected 2 high-purity water ice samples, the sealed containers securely fixed on the lunar rover's sample rack. Sample collection task completed. All samples are secured. Preparing for return. Chen Linfeng conducted a final check of the vehicle and equipment, confirming that the safety tether was securely connected. U-23 received. The navigation system has set the return route, starting now. The massive lunar rover turned around, beginning to climb out of the crater along the tracks it had made. The moment it exited the permanent shadow region, the blazing sunlight instantly flooded the vehicle, and the extreme darkness outside the window transformed into blinding brightness, the strong contrast causing Chen Linfeng to instinctively squint. External temperature readings began to rise rapidly from over 200 degrees below zero, and retrieve all known lunar exploration mission records, especially those concerning spacecraft that were planned or might have crashed in the Shackleton crater area. Searching. Among the completed lunar exploration missions, there are no official records indicating any spacecraft crashed near this coordinate point. There is missing information regarding some commercial or undisclosed international missions, but the likelihood is extremely low, and quickly responded, eliminating the most obvious possibilities. The airlock chamber is ready. Welcome back, Commander. The U-23 smoothly docked into the base. The outer airlock door closed and the pressure restored. He did not immediately remove his heavy spacesuit, but carefully transferred the sample marked anomaly point alpha into a separate isolation analysis box. Water is the hope of survival. Welcome back, Commander. Vital signs monitoring indicates you are in a state of fatigue. It is advised to replenish fluids and nutrients. Annie's voice echoed within the living pod, as steady as ever, yet at this moment it carried an inexplicable warmth, though he knew it was merely a programmed response. We'll talk later, Annie. Chen Linfeng's voice sounded somewhat muffled through the visor. Prioritize processing. He carefully removed the heavy spacesuit, as if shedding a layer of burdensome armor and hung it back on its desk. Then he immediately walked towards the most crucial find placed next to the isolation analysis box, a sealed container holding high-purity ice sample. The surface of the container was still coated with icy frost from the permanent shadow zone, slowly sublimating under the lights of the living pod, emitting wisps of thin vapor. Chen Linfeng touched the container through protective gloves. The cold sensation stirred a peculiar warmth within his heart. This was not an ordinary mineral. It represented the potential for life to endure. Initiate Level 1 Purification Protocol for the water treatment unit. He commanded with a hint of urgency. Command confirmed. The water treatment unit is preheated and ready to receive the raw materials. Annie responded. Chen Linfeng connected the sealed container to the input interface of the water treatment unit. The complex system began to operate, employing a series of precise filtration, sedimentation, and low-temperature distillation to separate the mixture of lunar soil and ice, extracting relatively pure water. This process required time. Chen Linfeng stood by silently watching the indicator of water purity on the dashboard gradually rise. As the first drops of initially purified water dripped into the temporary storage tank, the crisp sound resonated beautifully in the silent chamber. Chen Linfeng picked up a clean sampling cup, filling it halfway with water. The water appeared clear and transparent, devoid of impurities. He hesitated for a moment, but eventually brought it to his lips and took a cautious sip. A cold liquid carrying a metallic and ozone-like taste slid down his throat, far from the flavor of any natural water source on Earth, even stranger than the recycled water from the base. Yet this sip of water held profound significance. It came from the moon itself, a result he had personally seized from desolation. A tiny but tangible sense of accomplishment alleviated some of the physical fatigue and mental pressure. Preliminary biochemical tests of the water sample are complete. The content of harmful substances is within safe thresholds. Annie reported timely. Chen Linfeng nodded and poured the remaining water back into the treatment system. Now was not the time to celebrate. While processing the ice, his gaze turned towards the hydroponic farm area on the other side of the living pod. In several transparent cultivation tanks, algae were engaged in photosynthesis under specific spectral lighting, generating precious oxygen and providing primary biological purification for the circulation system. But more importantly, there was the small, unactivated high-grade plant cultivation unit nearby. He walked over and opened the temperature and humidity-controlled seed bank, where seeds of wheat, rice, potatoes, and several common vegetables were stored in an organized manner. These small, dormant life forms were the culmination of thousands of years of human agricultural civilization and were key to his future self-sufficiency in food. He took out a small packet of potato seed tubers. They appeared shriveled and ordinary, but under suitable conditions, each could yield enough fruit to fill one's belly. He carefully placed them into the prepared cultivation medium, setting the parameters for light, moisture, and nutrient supply. Initiate Oasis Agricultural Module Experimental Unit 1, he announced. Soft LED lights brightened, evenly casting light over the cultivation tanks, simulating sunlight on Earth. Nutrient solution began to slowly flow through the small pipes into the medium. Everything was quiet, but beneath this silence lay the prelude to life being reawakened. Watching those dormant seeds, Chen Linfeng seemed to see a miniature green field, envisioning the simplest roasted potatoes that might someday appear on his dining table. Hope sometimes hides in these most unpretentious things. After dealing with the urgent matters of water and food, an overwhelming sense of fatigue finally surged forth. He walked to the observation window of the living pod. Outside, Earth was still shrouded in that ominous cloud of dust, with only the edge revealing a hint of blurred blue. The once bustling, vibrant, and cherished planet had now transformed into this desolate interplay of light and shadow. Then he turned and walked to the control panel, bringing up a personal log interface. He did not write lengthy prose, but merely recorded Lunar Standard Day mission log. Successfully completed the first collection of ice. Swearin is operating stably. Oasis module initiated. Everything for survival. After writing, he closed the interface and took out a standard space meal package from the storage compartment, heating it and quietly finishing it. He ate quickly, as if completing a necessary task. Then he made his way to the narrow rest pod. Lying in the sleeping bag fixed to the wall, the aches throughout his body reminded him of the day's hardships. The lighting in the pod automatically dimmed, leaving only the necessary indicator lights. In the haziness before succumbing to sleep, he seemed to hear his daughter's voice, not calling for daddy, but humming a cheerful, albeit off-key nursery rhyme. He knew this was merely a hallucination born from extreme fatigue, but he did not resist allowing this illusory warmth to envelop him as he sank into a brief, dreamless darkness. Within the living pod, only the soft hum of the water treatment unit, the low whir of the circulation fan, and the steady light from the plant cultivation tanks collectively guarded this tiny yet resilient breath of life in the desolate universe. The stable energy provided by Sui Rin injected powerful vitality into the Jinghai base, while the successfully retrieved water resources served as the lifeblood sustaining existence. However, Chen Linfeng understood that true life could not solely rely on cold machinery and recycled algae. The continuation of human civilization was inseparable from that symbolic shade of green. After completing the preliminary purification and storage of the water ice, he devoted most of his energy to the agricultural experimental module he named Oasis. This was no longer merely a survival task. It felt more like a ritual, a declaration against the void. The module was located on one side of the living pod, composed of several multi-layer culture tanks, each equipped with an independent LED lighting system, drip irrigation equipment, and nutrient solution circulation devices. Chen Linfeng adjusted every parameter as if handling the most precise instruments. The lighting cycle simulated the day and night of Earth, but was optimized for the Moon's low-gravity environment. The nutrient solutions formulation referenced the most mature space agriculture programs in the database and was fine-tuned based on water quality test results. The first batch of residents he chose were potatoes. This crop boasted high yields and comprehensive nutrition, with the tubers serving as both seeds and food, making it an ideal choice for survival in the apocalypse. He carefully buried the shriveled potato tubers into specially formulated simulated lunar soil rich in minerals and organic matter. Every movement was gentle and focused, as if afraid to disturb these slumbering lives. Any record the activation of Oasis Module Tank 1. Crop potato. The light cycle is set for 16 hours of light and 8 hours of darkness. The nutrient solution supply frequency is every 4 hours for 5 minutes each time. As he operated, he dictated the record. Recorded. Environmental parameters are being monitored. Do you need me to remind you of the irrigation and light switching times? Annie asked. Yes. Any parameter deviating more than 5% from the set value will trigger an immediate alarm. Chen Linfeng replied. He knew that in such a highly artificial environment, any slight deviation could lead to failure. In the days that followed, tending to these crops became his most important activity aside from routine system maintenance. Every day, he spent a significant amount of time leaning in front of the observation window of the culture tank, staring at the inert brown substrate. The beam of the helmet light scanned every inch of soil, searching for even the slightest hint of green. At first, there were no changes. The culture tank only held constant lighting, regularly dripping nutrient solutions, and the lifeless soil. The process of waiting was excruciatingly long. In absolute silence and solitude, hope and doubt alternated like tides washing over his heart. Sometimes he would have hallucinations, as if he could see the delicate swell of tender shoots breaking through the soil, but upon closer inspection, it was merely the natural texture of the substrate. Annie scanned the surface layer of the soil for any signs of biological activity. For instance, unusual heat caused by cell division. He couldn't help but ask, knowing that such scanning was premature for plants that had yet to break ground. Scan complete. The surface soil temperature is uniform and no abnormal heat sources have been detected. Life sign monitoring must wait until after germination. Annie's responses were always based on data and logic, devoid of any emotion, but this objective statement sometimes exacerbated his anxiety. Until the morning of the 7th lunar day, Chen Linfeng, as usual, was the first to arrive at the Oasis module. Habitually, he first glanced at Tank 1, not holding much expectation. However, at that moment, his gaze swept past, his heart jolted, and his breath nearly halted. In that patch of brown substrate near where he buried a seed potato, an extremely tiny, yet distinctly clear light yellow sprout had pushed through the soil, timidly peeking out. It was so small, so fragile, as if it would break with the slightest touch, yet against that monotonous gray and brown backdrop, this subtle yellow shone brighter than any gem. It worked. A surge of indescribable ecstasy mingled with a tremendous sense of relief swept through his entire being. He almost cried out, but the sound caught in his throat, transforming into a silent sob. Instinctively, he reached out his hand, wanting to touch that sprout, but just as his fingertip was about to meet the observation window's glass, he abruptly stopped, fearing that his breath might disturb this newly born miracle. Annie, did you see it? It sprouted. Tank 1, the potato has sprouted. His voice trembled with excitement as he spoke into the communicator, eager to confirm this moment with the only person who could share it. Commander, the optical sensor has confirmed. In culture tank A1 coordinates X23Y17, new plant tissue has been detected breaking through the surface of the substrate. Based on morphological analysis, it has been confirmed to be a potato seedling. Annie's voice remained steady, but Chen Linfeng sensed. Perhaps he was overinterpreting, but he thought he heard a faint simulation of confirmation in her tone. Record this moment. Lunar Standard Time Day 37061 for the Oasis module has successfully germinated for the first time. He ordered excitedly. Recorded. The first germination event has been marked as a significant milestone. Chen Linfeng stood quietly in front of the culture tank, gazing for a long time. Sunlight simulated bathed that sprout, coating it with a faint halo. This was not just a plant, it was a symbol. It proved that even in the harsh environment of the moon, amid the backdrop of a potentially collapsed Earth, civilization life could still find a way. It represented the future, represented hope, and symbolized that all his efforts and perseverance were not in vain. "We will survive," he whispered. Calm like fine dust covering the moon's surface briefly descended upon the silent sea base. Chen Linfeng established a new daily order, checking the systems, tending to the increasingly robust seedlings in the oasis, analyzing water and ice samples, and exercising to combat the muscle atrophy caused by the moon's low gravity. He even began organizing the vast technical data in the base's database, as if preparing for some distant, yet undefined goal. This regularity itself acted like a tranquilizer, numbing the longing for Earth and the unfathomable. Suddenly Annie's voice broke the silence, which was filled only with the low hum of equipment. Her tone carried a sense of urgency that Chen Linfeng had never heard before. Priority 1 alert. The Solar Observation Module has detected an X9.3 class flare eruption in the southeastern quadrant of the Sun. The accompanying high-energy particle stream is expected to reach the Earth-Moon space in 24 to 36 hours. Chen Linfeng was recording the growth data of potato seedlings when his fingers paused, leaving an ink dot on the screen. X9.3 class. This was a violent eruption that could only occur during peak solar activity years. He immediately set aside all work and hurried to the main control console. On the holographic screen, the image from the solar telescope was startling. An active region on the sun's edge erupted with a blinding white light far exceeding its usual brightness as a massive amount of material was ejected, forming a clearly visible coronal mass ejection CME arc predicted to be directed towards the Earth-Moon system. What are the main components of the particle stream? Expected peak intensity. Chen Linfeng's voice was tense. The light radiation from the flare itself was inconsequential. It was the high-energy proton's solar cosmic rays and the plasma carried by the CME that posed the lethal threat. They could easily penetrate the cabin walls, delivering a devastating blow to electronic devices and inflicting irreversible damage to human DNA, primarily high-energy protons. According to the model calculations, the radiation dose rate from this event without protection could exceed 10 times the shielding capacity of a spacesuit within hours, which would be fatal to unprotected life forms. Annie's report was cold and precise. The magnetospheric disturbances triggered by the CME, if the Earth's magnetosphere still has effective influence, may further enhance the radiation environment. Immediately initiate the storm shelter protocol. Chen Linfeng did not hesitate. This was the standard procedure designed for such extreme space weather during the base's construction. Annie, give me a countdown. Command confirmed. Storm shelter protocol initiated. Expected arrival time of the high-energy particle stream, front 28 hours. The piercing alarm instantly echoed throughout the base, and the red warning lights began to spin. However, Chen Linfeng's movements were calm. Years of training came into play at this moment. His brain functioned like a precise machine, executing the contingency plan quickly and orderly. Step 1. Terminate external operations. Recall all external robots and confirm they have all returned to storage. Engineering robots A and B have both returned to the maintenance dock. Step 2. Prohibit all external activities. Lock all non-essential airlock chambers, elevating permissions to the highest level. All external channels have been locked. Permissions confirmed. Step 3. Adjust the energy systems. Reduce the power of the Swirenchi fusion reactor to the minimum needed to sustain life support and core systems. Non-critical loads, including non-essential lighting for the Oasis module and some non-real-time data processing units, have all gone offline. Power adjustment in progress. Non-critical systems are offline. Energy is concentrated to supply the core shielding zone. Step 4, and the most crucial step, enter the core protection chamber. Chen Linfeng issued commands while quickly scanning the console to confirm the status of all systems. The core protection chamber was the most fortified area of the base, surrounded by thick polyethylene layers of water and lead composite materials, making it the best sanctuary against radiation. He conducted a final check of the base's overall airtightness and system status, ensuring that even if he entered the shelter state, the base could maintain its most basic operations under Annie's autonomous control. He grabbed a pre-prepared emergency kit containing high-energy food, water, necessary tools, and a reinforced. He walked towards a heavy metal door on one side of the living chamber, which looked like an ordinary storage room. After entering a long password and performing an iris scan, the door slid open, silently revealing a small, yet exceptionally sturdy chamber behind it. There were no portholes, only the necessary life support interfaces, a simple resting space, and a terminal connected to the main control system. Chen Linfeng stepped inside. The heavy door behind him closed and locked. The chamber's lighting automatically turned on, casting a soft, non-glaring, cool white light. Annie, report the status of the protection chamber and external environment monitoring. The protection chamber is completely isolated. Radiation shielding efficiency 100. The life support system is operating independently and well. The intensity of the external particle stream has begun to show a detectable upward trend consistent with the expected model. Chen Linfeng sat down on the narrow bunk connecting the data board to the terminal. The screen displayed a simplified status map of the base's core system and real-time readings of external radiation doses. The current readings were still stable, but it was foreseeable that a violent baptism from the stars was about to arrive. He leaned against the cold cabin wall, having done all he could. Now all that was left was to wait. To wait for that invisible, inaudible roar that could obliterate everything as it swept across this desolate land. In this absolutely safe cage, he once again felt the insignificance of the individual. Humanity could reach the moon and establish bases, yet in the face of cosmic-scale events it remained as fragile as dust. This was a silent confrontation, a battle between technology and the might of nature. Time flowed slowly in the absolute silence of the core protective pod like a thick syrup. On the data panel, the curve representing external radiation levels resembled a fierce venomous snake, rapidly rising, at first twisting at a high level for over 10 hours before reluctantly beginning to fall. Chen Linfeng was mostly awake, sustaining his strength by chewing emergency rations and drinking a small amount of water, occasionally glancing at the readings on the data panel and the green icons representing the status of the base's core systems. Every slight fluctuation in the readings tugged at his nerves. Annie would periodically report in a calm tone the peak of the particle flow has passed and the current dose rate is on a downward trend. No significant stress changes detected in the external structure of the base. The core life support system is operating stably. These reports were his only anchor in this metal oasis. He attempted to sleep, but his slumber was shallow, filled with bizarre fragmented dreams, often jolted awake by imagined alarm sounds. When the radiation readings finally fell into a yellow zone marked as limited extravehicular activity permitted, he had already spent over 30 hours in this cramped sanctuary. Commander, the main high-energy particle flow has mostly passed. The current radiation level is still above background values, but does not pose immediate lethality. It is advisable to leave the protective pod for preliminary damage assessment. Annie's voice finally brought the long-awaited news. Chen Linfeng took a long breath and moved his somewhat stiff limbs. He skillfully conducted a pre-exit self-check before unlocking the heavy pod door. As the door slid open, the familiar air of the living pod infused with metallic and ozone scents rushed in oddly, giving him a sense of coming home. Everything in the living pod seemed normal, with stable lighting and a low hum from the equipment. But he immediately noticed that several indicator lights for non-core systems on the control panel had gone dark. Those were systems that were previously offline to conserve energy. He quickly walked to the Oasis agricultural module. The LED grow lights had restarted as programmed, and under the soft light the few potato seedlings seemed a bit wilted, but were not dead, which eased his anxious heart by half. Life is more tenacious than imagined. Annie conducted a full scan of all base systems, focusing on external structures and energy collection units. As he issued the order, he walked toward the main control console, calling up the external monitoring footage. Scanning. The internal structure of the base is intact. Internal pressure is stable. However, Annie's report included a rare brief pause. Remote diagnostics indicate that the solar panel array in Zone B at the top of the base has seen its power generation efficiency drop to 32 of rated value. The optical sensors detected significant blurring and physical deformation on the surface of the panels in that area. Indeed, a weight settled in Chen Linfeng's heart. The solar panels directly exposed to the elements were prime targets for solar storms. He immediately activated the high-definition camera on the external mechanical arm of the base, focusing it on the Zone B array. The footage revealed a heartbreaking sight. The originally smooth and even deep blue solar panels were now covered in fine white spots, as if sandpaper had been used on them. The damage from continuous bombardment by high-energy particles would permanently reduce their photovoltaic conversion efficiency. More seriously, several panels at the edges of the array showed clear curling and tearing, as if they had been brutally ravaged by an invisible giant hand. It is inferred to be permanent damage from high-energy particles to the semiconductor materials, along with structural stress damage potentially caused by strong electromagnetic field changes accompanying a coronal mass ejection (CME). The Zone B array needs repairs or isolation, otherwise it may affect the overall grid stability and could become a potential hazard, as damaged parts might fall off due to temperature changes. Assess the feasibility of repairs. Chen Linfeng's voice was deep. The fusion reactor is the heart, but the solar panels are important auxiliary energy sources and redundancies, especially during periods when the fusion reactor needs maintenance. Repairs require replacement of damaged panels. The base warehouse has spare parts. However, the operation requires extravehicular activity, and while the current external radiation dose has decreased, it is still above the safety threshold. It is advisable to wait 12 to 24 hours for the radiation level to further drop. Chen Linfeng shook his head as he gazed at the damaged panels on the screen. We cannot wait. The damaged parts could fall off at any moment, striking other equipment or the base shell, posing an even greater risk. Prepare for emergency extravehicular repairs. Annie devised the simplest repair plan: isolate the severely damaged units and ensure the remaining parts operate stably. Plan generation in progress. Estimated extravehicular operation time is 45 minutes. It is strongly advised that you use additional protective shielding. Annie seemed to attempt to dissuade him, but ultimately switched to providing support. Chen Linfeng did not delay. He donned the heavy extravehicular suit again, this time adding extra polyethylene protective plates at critical. He carefully checked the tool's specialized panel cutting tools, insulating sealant and fasteners for securing the replacement panels. As the airlock door opened again, he stepped onto the moon's surface after the storm. The outside world seemed unchanged, still a black velvet sky, glaring sunlight, and endless desolation. But Chen Linfeng knew that the invisible killer continued to lurk in the environment. He could hear the denser, more frequent tick-tock from the radiation dosimeter in his helmet. He maneuvered the engineering mechanical arm at the top of the base to lift himself next to the Zone B array. Upon closer inspection, the damage was even more shocking. He steadied himself and began to work. First, he carefully cut away the panels that were completely torn and only connected by cables, preventing them from becoming dangerous debris. Then he meticulously wrapped and sealed the exposed edges with insulating material to prevent short circuits. Finally, he checked and reinforced the fastening points of the adjacent panels. Throughout the process, he had to be extremely cautious, with movements precise and swift. The low-gravity environment of the moon made operations clumsy, and the heavy spacesuit and protective plates further limited his agility. Sweat quickly soaked through his inner lining, and the visor fogged up from rapid breathing, which was promptly cleared by the defogging system. He dared not be careless. Every collision of tools with metal sounded exceptionally loud in the silent vacuum. When the last damaged panel was safely removed and the edges were processed, Annie's voice came through. The remaining units of the Zone B array are stable and have reconnected to the grid. Power generation efficiency is stable at 65. Commander, the radiation exposure dose is nearing the safety limit. Please return immediately. Chen Linfeng did not hesitate and controlled the mechanical arm to gently lower himself back to the moon's surface. He quickly walked back to the airlock, and only when the inner door closed tightly and the hiss of pressurization sounded did he truly relax. As he removed the heavy spacesuit, he felt a wave of exhausting fatigue. But looking at the control panel showing the Zone B array had returned to a stable yellow. Annie conducted a routine scan of the electromagnetic spectrum, focusing on monitoring any periodic signals. This had almost become a habitual action for him every night before sleep. Command confirmed. Starting scan. Annie responded. However, a few seconds later, Annie's voice echoed again. Commander, an anomaly has been detected. Chen Linfeng's fingers froze. Anomaly signal source. Non-natural origin. Frequency bandwidth extremely narrow, yet exhibiting a clear periodic repetition characteristic. The signal strength is weak and the signal-to-noise ratio is low, but the pattern recognition confidence has reached 87. Chen Linfeng sat up suddenly, his heart tightening. Source direction. Distance. The signal source direction does not originate from Earth. Annie's report was clear and cold. Initial triangulation analysis indicates the signal source is located on the surface of the moon. The coordinates are approximately 200 kilometers outside the Jinghai base in the region of Plato Crater. Confirm the signal source coordinates and characteristics again. Chen Linfeng's voice carried an unnoticed tension. He needed to rule out any possibility of instrument malfunction or interference from natural phenomena. Confirming, the signal persists with a stable period of once every 4.7 seconds. The source point coordinates have been corrected to longitude. Annie reported a series of precise lunar coordinates clearly pointing to the distant region of Plato Crater. The signal modulation method is simple but exhibits obvious artificial intelligence error-correcting coding features, ruling out the possibility of being produced by known natural celestial bodies or geological activities. The confidence level has risen to 94. This implied that on the other end of the signal, there was a high probability of being some human creation, or perhaps it could be the survivors. The allegiance remains unclear. Annie's calm voice rang out again, analyzing various possibilities based on the signal characteristics. Initial judgment suggests that its technological standards are significantly different from our national or internationally mainstream deep space communication protocols and are closer to a simplified coding system developed by certain commercial space companies in the past decade. But we cannot completely rule out the possibility of camouflage or special mission coding. Commercial company. SpaceX. This speculation caused Chen Linfeng's heartbeat to skip a beat. If that is the case, they might possess more flexible technology and resources, but could also lack constraints. He walked to the huge observation window, gazing at the unchanging, desolate landscape outside. Earth remained silent, yet on the moon there might be new variables lurking. His gaze shifted from Earth for the first time, earnestly and with a scrutinizing intent, towards the horizon of the moon, as if he could penetrate the 200 kilometers of distance to see that signal source. Annie, he spoke, his voice hoarse from inner struggle. If we remain silent, what is the likelihood of them discovering us? Under the premise of not actively transmitting any signals, judging solely by the current signal strength from the other side, If their directional detection capability is insufficient to cover this base, the probability of discovery is less than 3. But if they possess more advanced passive detection means, or if our base's large equipment like the fusion reactor runs and produces detectable leakage signals, the probability will significantly increase. Concealment is not absolutely safe. If we attempt to initiate contact, the risks are uncontrollable. Our signals will expose the precise location of the base, and we cannot predict their reaction. Caught in a dilemma, time slipped away in silence. Eventually, Chen Linfeng slowly turned around, his expression restored to calm, but deep within burned a determined flame. He could not sit idly by, nor could he act recklessly. He needed information, needed assessment. His voice became firm. Formulate a plan. A remote reconnaissance plan. Objective: to approach the signal source area as closely as possible without exposing our presence, conducting optical and electronic reconnaissance to confirm its nature. Use U-23A, but the action plan must be extremely cautious, prioritizing concealment above all else. He chose a middle path: no contact, but to verify with his own eyes. This required courage as well as immense patience and skill. Command confirmed. Starting to develop this stealth reconnaissance plan. It is expected to take 6 hours for route planning, risk assessment, and equipment preparation. Annie immediately began to work. This was no longer a simple resource collection, but a genuine military operation, gathering critical intelligence in an unknown, potentially hostile environment. The U-23 was once again brought into the maintenance dock, but this time not for routine maintenance, rather for a near-complete reconfiguration as pre-war preparation. The stealth reconnaissance plan devised by Chen Linfeng and Annie centered around the word concealment. Primary objective: reduce the vehicle's own signal characteristics. Chen Linfeng stood beside the engineering robot, directing it to modify the lunar rover. First, additional composite shielding layers were added to critical areas of the vehicle, such as the engine compartment and communication module exterior, to minimize heat radiation and electromagnetic leakage. These shielding layers made U-23 appear bulkier, yet draped it in a cloak of invisibility. Secondly, optimize the travel route, utilizing terrain for cover. On the holographic lunar map, a winding new route was planned. This route intentionally avoided open plains, choosing to move along the edges of craters and the shadowed areas of mountains. Although the journey increased by nearly 1/3, it maximized the natural concealment offered by the lunar terrain. Lastly, establish strict communication discipline. Chen Linfeng emphasized to Annie during the mission, unless faced with an extreme emergency, maintain absolute radio silence. All data will be stored locally and analyzed after returning to the base. Understood. I have set up an automatic signal monitoring program, which will immediately force termination upon detecting any signal transmissions that could expose our location. Annie responded. In addition to vehicle modifications and route planning, Chen Linfeng's personal equipment was also adjusted. He checked the set of extravehicular suits for extreme environments, ensuring their life support systems had longer operational capabilities, and additionally equipped with high magnification binoculars and telephoto lenses for long-distance observation. He also prepared a simple signal analysis device that could attempt deeper capture and analysis of target signals without actively transmitting. During a test of the vehicle's camera's telephoto function, he instinctively aimed the lens towards Earth. In the lens, that planet was still wrapped in murky clouds, but in the edge area there seemed to be a subtle change in the color of the clouds that was hard to detect. Is it just a psychological effect or a real physical change? He must not be distracted. The threat, or rather the opportunity before him, came from the moon itself. On the eve of departure, Chen Linfeng inspected all equipment one last time. He stood in front of U-23, the camouflaged lunar rover quietly parked in the docking bay like a dormant steel beast. He reached out and patted the cold vehicle body. A strange sense of familiarity surged within him. He recalled years ago as an Air Force pilot, every time before taking off he would similarly pat the aircraft, a wordless communication, a trust in entrusting life to machinery. Old buddy, he whispered to himself, this time I'll be relying on you again. When the base's simulated dawn system slowly illuminated, marking the arrival of a new lunar day, Chen Linfeng was already dressed and standing before the airlock. His gaze was sharp and calm, all unease and hesitation locked deep within. At this moment, he had only one identity: the commander executing the mission. Any final mission confirmation? His voice came through the mask, calm and clear. Mission confirmed. Stealth reconnaissance. Objective: unknown signal source in the Plato crater area. Highest priority: concealment. Good luck, Commander. The inner airlock door slowly closed. The U-23, like a silent phantom, quietly advanced along the line where light and shadow met. Chen Linfeng chose to strictly follow the stealth plan, shutting down all non-essential electronic devices, even reducing the headlights to the lowest power, illuminating only a small area ahead. The vehicle relied on preloaded navigation data and an inertial guidance system to move slowly yet steadily across the rugged terrain. Just as the vehicle was about to navigate around a protruding boulder, the two front wheels suddenly plunged downwards without warning. Not good. Chen Linfeng's mind rang with alarm, and reacting like lightning, he yanked the control lever, trying to lift the front and reverse. However, the moon's low gravity delayed the vehicle's response, and the speed of the descent was astonishing. What lay beneath was not solid lunar rock, but a quicksand area with a hard shell on the surface and extremely soft, delicate moon dust below. Such terrain is not rare on the moon, but it is extremely difficult to identify from the surface. The massive body of the U-23 instantly lost balance, tilting severely to the right. Damn it! Chen Linfeng growled, immediately cutting off the power output to prevent the wheels from spinning, and he quickly scanned the control panel attempting to initiate emergency protocols, but the angle of the vehicle's tilt had already exceeded certain safety thresholds, causing some self-rescue functions to be automatically locked. Cold sweat instantly soaked his inner lining. He had fallen into a real predicament. Being trapped in this desolate place with no signs of civilization meant he understood all too well what that entailed. The life support system of the spacesuit had its limits and rescue. There was no rescue at all. He forced himself to calm down, took a few deep breaths, and began to assess the situation. The vehicle was tilted at about 25 degrees, but its main structure seemed to be undamaged. He tried to apply power intermittently to the left while hoping to leverage it to slightly lift the right wheel, but the effect was minimal, and he felt the vehicle sink a bit more. He could not panic. He stopped the futile operations. What was needed now was precise judgment and the correct tools. He looked at the robotic arm control interface. The engineering robotic arm. This was the only hope he had left. He needed to use the robotic arm to either find a solid anchor point around the vehicle and try to drag the body out, or to excavate at the edge of the pit to create a foothold for the wheels to climb. But this meant he had to operate outside the cabin. In a state of radio silence in the unfamiliar and perilous terrain hundreds of kilometers from the base, he would undertake high-risk extravehicular operations. This was an extremely difficult decision. Exiting the cabin exposed him to danger and consumed precious life support resources, and success was not guaranteed. Remaining inside the cabin meant waiting for death. Chen Linfeng's gaze turned to the navigation screen, which showed less than 40 kilometers remaining to the target area, the Plato crater. That mysterious signal source seemed so close yet distant, as if it were out of reach. Hope and despair wrapped around him tightly once more. He never expected that before even seeing the target he would first step into a natural trap set by the moon. Gritting his teeth, his gaze became resolute once again. Sitting and waiting to die was never an option for him. Annie, if you can receive my thoughts, he murmured to the silent cabin, then began to check the status of his extravehicular suit and operated the robotic arm to transfer a set of excavation tools and emergency towing cable outside. He had to go out, he had to save himself. The moment he stepped out of the U-23, Chen Linfeng felt as though he had plunged from a relatively safe metallic cocoon into the cold and harsh reality. The massive body of the lunar rover tilted with the two large mesh wheels in the front, right almost completely buried in moon dust. He first checked the safety cable connecting him to the airlock door of the lunar rover. This was his lifeline, confirming it was secure. Then he activated the engineering robotic arm of the U-23. The robust arm moved slowly, carrying a large bucket reaching toward the edge of the vehicle's pit. His plan was to first excavate an anchor point in a relatively solid area, then use the towing cable to attempt to drag the body out. However, operating under the moon's low gravity was far more difficult than in simulated training. Every movement of the robotic arm carried a disquieting sense of delay. When the bucket made contact with the lunar surface, it did not cut in forcefully, but instead sank as if caught in quicksand. The excavated moon dust was incredibly fluffy and almost impossible to stack into a solid form, let alone serve as a reliable anchor point. After a few attempts, the shallow pit he dug was quickly filled by the surrounding falling powder. His hopes were thwarted for the first time. Chen Linfeng felt a surge of frustration as sweat began to bead on his forehead. He changed his strategy, maneuvering the robotic arm to attempt to directly lift the severely tilted front right corner of the vehicle. The tilted body of the vehicle seemed to sway slightly, but the overall trend of sinking remained unchanged, and instead, due to the force applied, the right rear will sank even deeper. No, this will only make things worse. He immediately ceased the lifting. The vehicle's weight far exceeded the design load of the robotic arm, and forcibly lifting it on the unstable lunar surface was akin to chasing a mirage. Time passed by second, and the remaining time of the life support system in the extravehicular suit was continuously decreasing. Was he really going to be trapped to death here? Like a forgotten screw forever nailed to this lonely desert. A surge of unwilling anger flared up from the depths of his heart, burning away some of the fatigue and despair. He could not give up. There had to be a way. His gaze turned once again to the engineering robotic arm, then fell on the vehicle itself. An extremely risky thought emerged: to utilize the power of the left wheel, which which had not yet sunk in conjunction with the robotic arm providing upward leverage on the right side simultaneously. Just like on Earth when a vehicle is freed, one wheel is driven while someone assists in lifting the sunk part. But this required exquisite coordination and a great deal of luck. If the power control of the left wheel was mishandled, it could lead to the vehicle sliding sideways and completely overturning. The pivot point and force of the robotic arm also had to be just right. This was a gamble with his life as the stake. There was no time to hesitate. Chen Linfeng took a deep breath of the cold, recycled air, his gaze becoming resolute. He climbed back into the cockpit, gripping the control lever tightly, reducing the power output to the left wheel to its lowest setting, configuring it for intermittent pulse drive mode. Then he exited the cabin again, manipulating the robotic arm to carefully position the edge of the bucket beneath the hub of the right front wheel on a relatively solid piece of lunar rock. "Come on," he shouted at himself, simultaneously activating the pulse drive of the left wheel and commanding the robotic arm to continuously lift upward. The body of the U-23 shook violently. The left wheel spun intermittently, kicking up large amounts of moon dust, and the body shook violently in its tilted state. The hydraulic rod of the robotic arm pushed up with all its might, making the connection with the vehicle groan under the strain. Chen Linfeng's heart raced to his throat as he stared intently at the tilt gauge. Had he succeeded? Or was it a complete rollover? Just at that critical moment, he felt a distinct upward jolt beneath his feet. Then, with another pulse from the left wheel and the full force lift of the robotic arm, the right front wheel, which had sunk the deepest, suddenly broke free a short distance upward, regaining some traction. Now, Chen Linfeng wasted no time, immediately increasing the power to the left wheel to a stable output while maintaining the lift of the robotic arm. The U-23 let out a deep roar as its massive body, seizing this hard-won opportunity, suddenly thrust left, and with a cascade of moon dust falling away, the right wheel finally struggled free from the pit inch by inch. When all four wheels of the vehicle made contact with the relatively solid lunar surface again, although the body was still slightly tilted, it was no longer in a position of absolute peril. Chen Linfeng leaned against the robotic arm, panting heavily, his clothes completely soaked with sweat. He had succeeded. Through a gamble of courage and a stroke of luck at the final moment, he pulled himself back from the brink of death. He dared not linger here, immediately checking the vehicle's condition. Apart from some scratches on the right side and a thick layer of moon dust, the main system seemed undamaged. He quickly returned to the cockpit, recalibrated the navigation system, and carefully drove the U-23 away from this dangerous area, heading towards the edge of a relatively safe small crater nearby to prepare for rest and a thorough inspection. After a brief rest and a comprehensive system check, the Jade Rabbit 3 reactivated, carrying the dust of the moon and the weariness of its escape, continuing towards the direction of the Plato crater. Chen Linfeng drove with even more caution than before, scanning every seemingly flat area repeatedly with sensors to confirm there were no hidden quicksand traps. The previous encounter felt like a cold splash of water, awakening him from the slight impatience that arose from nearing his target, transforming him back into the calm and vigilant scout. As the distance continued to shrink, the target coordinates marked by Annie drew ever closer. Chen Linfeng's heartbeat began to quicken involuntarily. He turned off the vehicle's headlights, relying solely on moonlight and starlight, as well as the low-light night vision system, stealthily maneuvering across the rugged terrain. The vehicle glided silently over the lunar surface like a true ghost. Finally, as he maneuvered Jade Rabbit 3 to slowly ascend a gentle lunar ridge, the full view of the target area suddenly appeared before him, outlined by starlight. It was a relatively flat plain at the base of the crater. In the center of the plain lay a massive object, sharply defined and completely out of place amidst the surrounding natural landscape, quietly resting under a thick layer of lunar dust, reflecting a dim sheen in the faint light. It was a spacecraft. Chen Linfeng abruptly pressed the brakes, bringing Jade Rabbit 3 to a steady stop in the shadow of the lunar ridge. He quickly operated the control panel, aiming the high-magnification telescope and telephoto camera lens at the colossal object. The lens zoomed in, and the details gradually became clearer. The outline of the spacecraft was faintly discernible, but its condition was extremely poor. The main structure was severely twisted, as if it had experienced violent impact or explosion. One side of the solar sail was completely shattered, scattered like broken wings. A massive tear was present on the hull, with the jagged metal edges grotesquely curling outward, revealing the pitch-black structure inside. Despite being heavily coated in dust, one could still vaguely identify the red and white paint scheme along with a familiar insignia, the SpaceX logo. Dragon spacecraft, Chen Linfeng murmured. This was a commercial crewed spacecraft, wholly different from his mission of transporting supplies. How could it be here? And in such a tragic manner of crash landing? His gaze was fixed intensely on the cockpit area of the spacecraft. Most of the windows were shattered and the interior was pitch dark. But just as he searched carefully, a faint blinking red light caught his attention. The light was near a relatively intact antenna base on the top of the spacecraft, blinking in a regular pattern matching the frequency of the signal pulse he had received earlier. A signal source. This is it. An emergency location beacon. But what about the people inside? He adjusted the focus and scanned every corner of the spacecraft more carefully, especially around the massive breach. Damaged hatches, scattered cables and components, and at the edge of the breach he seemed to see a color different from lunar dust and metal. The color of a spacesuit. A striking white interspersed with stripes of international orange half-concealed beneath the twisted metal and lunar dust. Someone is there. Are they alive or dead? He must get closer to confirm. But great risks loomed ahead. Was the spacecraft's nuclear battery or other power systems stable? Was there a risk of secondary collapse? If there were survivors, what was their condition? Were they aggressive? Chen Linfeng took a deep breath, forcing himself to analyze calmly. He observed the lunar surface surrounding the spacecraft, finding no traces of movement or signs of recent activity. The entire area was terrifyingly silent. Only that red beacon continued to blink. He glanced at the control panel of Jade Rabbit 3, the remaining time of the life support system slipping away silently. He could not linger here. Annie, he spoke softly, breaking the long silence. Record confirmed signal source as the crash-landed SpaceX Crew Dragon spacecraft, hull severely damaged. Discovered. Suspected traces of occupants. Preparing to approach for reconnaissance. No response. The communication remained silent. He checked his equipment and weapons one last time before slowly pushing open the cockpit door. This time he not only connected the safety tether, but also secured one into a massive rock formation on the lunar ridge as an extra precaution. Like a cheetah, he used the shadows of the terrain as cover, inching closer to that silent steel tomb. He carefully navigated around the scattered thermal insulation tiles and broken cables, moving towards the location where he had observed that splash of spacesuit color. As he drew nearer, the color became increasingly clear. It was indeed a spacesuit, predominantly white with stripes of international orange, exactly the standard design for extravehicular suits. The figure wearing it was halfling, half propped up in a relatively recessed area beneath the spacecraft's tier, as if seeking shelter in the last moments of impact. The figure remained motionless, covered by a thin layer of lunar dust, as if it had merged with this metallic grave. The first thing visible was the helmet visor. The visor was filled with fine cracks, but it appeared not to have completely shattered. Through the cracks he could see a face. A woman's face, pale as a ghost, her eyes tightly shut, long golden hair matted with sweat or blood sticking to her forehead and cheeks. Her lips were cracked, showing no signs of movement. But Chen Linfeng's sharp gaze caught an exceedingly subtle detail on the life support system panel on her spacesuit's chest. A faint green indicator light was blinking at an incredibly slow frequency, one blink after another. There were vital signs. But her condition was evidently dire, as the slow blinking of the green light indicated the system might be in a low-power maintenance mode, or oxygen and power were about to run out. He quickly moved closer, kneeling beside her. Her spacesuit was damaged in multiple places, and her left leg seemed unnaturally bent, possibly fractured. The face beneath the visor appeared young, around 30 years old, currently furrowed in pain or weakness. Chen Linfeng quickly checked her spacesuit's external interface, attempting to find a universal data port to connect with his equipment to read more detailed vital sign data. At the same time, he attempted to gently tap her helmet with his knuckles and raised his voice towards his microphone, shouting, "Hey, can you hear me? I am Chinese astronaut Chen Linfeng. You're safe. Hang in there." At first there was no response. Just as Chen Linfeng's heart sank again, he saw her eyelashes tremble ever so slightly. Then her fingers twitched slightly. She still had consciousness, even if it was exceedingly faint. Chen Linfeng no longer hesitated. Rescue was urgent. He had to take her back to the Jinghai base immediately. But how to transport an injured person? Jade Rabbit 3 was not designed for medical rescue. Space was limited, and the return journey would be bumpy, potentially worsening her injuries. His mind raced. First, he had to stabilize her condition. He quickly retrieved a portable oxygen tank from his emergency kit and connected it to her spacesuit's emergency supply interface to ensure her oxygen supply. He attempted to use the simple straps he carried to provide preliminary stabilization for her left leg, preventing secondary injury during transport. As he did this, his gaze inevitably swept past the massive tear in the spacecraft. It was pitch black inside, with distorted seats and scattered equipment vaguely visible. One could only imagine how violent the impact had been. That she survived was nothing short of a miracle. Just as he prepared to lift her up, his helmet light accidentally swept over a ground area not far from her. There, half concealed in the lunar dust, lay an irregularly shaped piece about the size of a palm, glimmering with a dull metallic sheen. It was not the common aluminum alloy or composite material of the spacecraft, but deeper in color and seemingly different in texture. Chen Linfeng's heart stirred. This was very similar in texture to the metallic fragments he had previously discovered beneath the water ice in Shackleton crater. Could this spacecraft's crash also be related to that unknown metal? But now was not the time for exploration. He swiftly collected the fragment in a sampling bag, marked it, and stuffed it into his toolbox. He took a deep breath and carefully, with the smoothest possible movements, hoisted the unconscious female astronaut into his arms. Her weight felt light under the moon's gravity, yet to Chen Linfeng it felt incredibly heavy. This was not just the weight of a life, but an unexpected immense responsibility and uncertainty. He carried her trudging step by step back to Jade Rabbit 3. He securely placed her in the relatively spacious rear seat area and fastened her with a seatbelt. Then he swiftly returned to the cockpit. Jade Rabbit 3, activate. Set the fastest safe route back to Jinghai base. He broke the radio silence, his voice tinged with urgency and tension. Command confirmed. Route planning in progress. Commander detecting you are carrying vital signs. Annie's voice displayed an obvious, almost human-like hesitation for the first time. Yes, Annie. A survivor. A SpaceX astronaut. Severely injured. Prepare the medical bay. Highest priority. Chen Linfeng commanded urgently while turning the vehicle around. Understood. Medical bay ready for activation. Life support system on standby. The engines of Jade Rabbit 3 roared low as it accelerated away from this land of death. Chen Linfeng glanced at the unconscious figure in the rearview camera, then at the gradually diminishing damaged Dragon spacecraft in the distance. He had found the source of the signal, and he had also encountered a living intruder. He was no longer the only solitary soul on the moon. The U-2-3 spacecraft nearly crashed into the docking bay of the Jinghai base, and as the outer airlock door closed rapidly behind him, Chen Linfeng felt his tense nerves relax slightly. Annie, status of the medical bay. He called urgently into the communicator while unfastening his safety belt, his voice echoing in the cramped cockpit. The medical bay is ready and the life support system is functioning normally. The sterile isolation procedure has been initiated. Annie's voice was calm and efficient, akin to that of the most well-trained head nurse. Chen Linfeng quickly turned around and moved to the back seat. The American astronaut, identified as Elizabeth Shaw by the name tag on her spacesuit, remained unconscious, her complexion appearing even paler under the cabin lights, and her breathing was so faint it was almost undetectable. He cautiously unbuckled her safety belt, attempting to lift her. In the low gravity of the moon, her weight was light, but Chen Linfeng's movements were exceptionally slow and heavy, fearing to jostle any internal injuries or fractures she might have. He carried her out of U-2-3, quickly crossing the docking corridor to enter a relatively independent area marked by a red cross, the base's emergency medical bay. The space here was small, but it was equipped with basic life support monitoring, infusion oxygen supply, and a multifunctional medical bed. Following Annie's vocal instructions, Chen Linfeng began to operate as if performing a delicate surgical procedure. First, he needed to remove her severely damaged spacesuit. This process had to be conducted with extreme caution, as any improper action could cause secondary harm to her fragile body. He first cut the external restraints with scissors, then carefully unfastened the complex pressure-sealed buckles. With each layer, he uncovered his heart, tightened a little more. Inside the spacesuit, the cushioning material near her left leg and ribs showed clear signs of compression and tearing, and he could even see some dried dark red blood. When the last inner lining was peeled away, revealing Elizabeth's body clad only in a thin work suit under the medical bay's lights, Chen Linfeng gasped. Her left lower leg had an unnatural bend, with surrounding swelling and bruising. There were also large areas of bruising around her ribs, the color alarmingly dark. Annie initiated a full-body scan. The scanners on either side of the medical bed moved slowly, emitting low humming sounds. A few minutes later, a three-dimensional image of her bones and internal organs appeared on the holographic screen. Diagnosis report: closed fracture of the left tibia and fibula accompanied by severe soft tissue contusions. Suspected fractures of the third and fourth ribs on the left side. No obvious acute bleeding points were detected during the internal organ scan, but signs of mild concussion were present. Vital signs were weak, with dehydration and extreme malnutrition. Overall assessment: severe injuries, but no immediate life-threatening condition. Chen Linfeng let out a long breath, the tension in his heart finally easing. No fatal internal injuries. This was a small mercy amidst the misfortune. He immediately began emergency treatment, following Annie's instructions and the medical database protocols. First, he attached the ECG monitor and blood oxygen probe to Elizabeth, administering a nutrient solution along with an 4-drip containing pain relief and anti-inflammatory medications. He took out an orthopedic splint, carefully cleaned the area around the wound, and then gently realigned and secured her left leg. For the rib injuries, he could only use elastic bandages for external stabilization to restrict movement. With each step, he focused intently, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. He was not a professional doctor, and every action depended on Annie's precise guidance and his own calm judgment. Once all emergency measures were completed and Elizabeth's vital signs began to stabilize with the support of medication and nutrients, Chen Linfeng felt a wave of intense fatigue wash over him. He leaned against the wall of the medical bay watching the rhythmic curves on the monitoring screen and the unfamiliar woman quietly sleeping on the medical bed. Who is she? Why was she there? What happened to the long spaceship? Countless questions surged in his mind. He noticed that even in her unconscious state her brows were tightly knitted and her lips occasionally moved, as if she were experiencing some terrible nightmare. Her golden hair spilled onto the white pillow, her face marked with bruises and abrasions from the impact, appearing both fragile and resilient. Chen Linfeng took a clean, thin blanket from the storage cabinet of the medical bay and gently covered her. Then he stepped back to the door, setting the environmental monitoring and alarms to ensure that Annie would notify him immediately if she woke up or if her vital signs fluctuated. Returning to the main area of the living cabin, a wave of exhaustion instantly engulfed him. He slumped into the chair at the control console, gazing out at the Earth still shrouded in dust clouds, a tumult of emotions swirling within him. He touched the strange metal fragment he had brought back from the crash site, feeling a vague connection between Elizabeth's appearance and the mysterious metal he had discovered earlier. Was it all just a coincidence? On the third day, as Chen Linfeng completed his routine inspection of the Oasis module and prepared to check the energy readings, Annie's calm voice resonated. Commander, the medical pod reports. Patient Elizabeth Shaw's vital signs have shown fluctuations with heightened brainwave activity indicating a possible return to consciousness. Chen Linfeng immediately set aside his work and hurried to the medical pod. The light inside the pod was soft. On the sickbed, Elizabeth's previously tightly closed eyelids were now gently trembling, her fingers curling slightly, and a faint painful groan escaped her throat. Chen Linfeng did not approach her immediately, but instead stood at a distance that would not impose upon her quietly. He saw her eyelashes quivering more intensely until at last those tightly shut eyes slowly and laboriously opened a narrow slit. They were blue eyes now filled with confusion, pain, and extreme weakness. Her pupils, adjusting to the light, moved somewhat vacantly, as if trying to discern her surroundings. Her gaze swept across the unfamiliar ceiling and medical equipment, finally landing on Chen Linfeng, who stood not far away. In an instant, her unfocused eyes abruptly narrowed, replaced by a pure, almost instinctual fear. She suddenly tried to sit up, but the sharp pain in her left leg and rib caused her to cry out in agony. As she fell back onto the bed, her face turning even paler. She resembled a frightened, trapped beast, her body tense, her gaze fixated on Chen Linfeng, filled with vigilance and hostility. Don't move. Your leg is broken, and you have injuries to your ribs. Chen Linfeng immediately spoke in English, raising both hands to indicate that he bore no weapons and harbored no malice. He kept his voice as calm and clear as possible. Elizabeth seemed to momentarily lessen her fear upon hearing English, yet her vigilance did not wane. She opened her mouth as if to say something, but her cracked lips only produced a hoarse breath. Her gaze quickly scanned the 5-star red flag emblem on Chen Linfeng's spacesuit, her pupils once again narrowing sharply as a more complex emotion, mingled with shock, disbelief, and even a hint of anger, flashed across her eyes. Water. She finally managed to squeeze out a word in an extremely weak voice, her tone so hoarse it was barely audible. Chen Linfeng immediately stepped aside, filled a sterile cup with warm water, and inserted a straw. He carefully handed it over without getting too close, placing the cup within her reach. Elizabeth cast a cautious glance at him, and then at the cup of water. Ultimately, thirst triumphed over fear. She trembled as she reached out, took the cup, and greedily sucked through the straw until the cup was nearly empty. The clear water seemed to restore some of her strength and slightly eased her taut nerves. Where is this? Who are you? She spoke again, her voice still weak, but clearer, thick, with an American accent. Her gaze remained locked on Chen Linfeng, scrutinizing him like a scanner. This is China's lunar Jinghai base. I am astronaut Chen Linfeng, he replied succinctly while paying close attention to her reaction. He noticed that when she heard China and Jinghai base, her brow furrowed tightly and her face exhibited extreme confusion and disbelief. Lunar base. Impossible. Dragon spacecraft. Her memories seemed jumbled as she struggled to recall the mission was to maintain the low Earth orbit space station. And then, light. A huge light. Her voice began to tremble and a great fear surfaced in her eyes as if she recalled something terrifying. Communications. Cut off. Impact. We lost control. She described in a fragmented manner, her words incoherent, but Chen Linfeng could piece together the gist. Her mission was originally not on the moon, but in Earth's orbit. A strong electromagnetic pulse EMP, or some kind of shock created by the nuclear explosion, caused the spacecraft's systems to malfunction, ultimately leading to a crash landing or crash on the moon. Earth. Elizabeth suddenly raised her head, her blue eyes fixed on Chen Linfeng, filled with a hint of nearly desperate hope. What happened to Earth? Has communication been restored? Is there any news of rescue? This question pierced through the brief and fragile barrier of communication between them like a cold dagger. Chen Linfeng's silence, coupled with a heavy expression he could not fully conceal, seemed to convey everything. The light of hope in Elizabeth's eyes quickly extinguished, replaced by a profound abyss of despair and pain. She abruptly closed her eyes, tears silently sliding from the corners, mingling with the bruises on her cheeks, looking particularly desolate. "No," she uttered in a near whimper, turning her face away as her shoulders began to tremble. Overwhelming sorrow and physical pain seemed to completely crush her at that moment. He silently filled another cup with water, placed it by her bedside, and then quietly exited the medical pod, gently closing the door. He understood that what she needed most now was perhaps not comfort, but the time and space to face this cruel reality alone. Chen Linfeng did not relax his surveillance over Elizabeth. Every day, he would deliver water and liquid food on schedule, but their communication was limited to the most basic necessities. Chen Linfeng stood at the door with the medical tray. Elizabeth merely nodded silently, or made a vague sound, her gaze always avoiding him, filled with detachment and lingering wariness. Chen Linfeng could understand her reaction. After experiencing the crash of the spaceship, the possible demise of her companion's severe injuries, and learning that Earth might have been destroyed, facing a male astronaut from an opponent nation in an entirely unfamiliar environment, her fear and vigilance were instinctual. He was not in a hurry to break this deadlock. Survival and safety were still the top priorities. He carefully checked her wounds and changed her bandages, his movements professional and restrained, avoiding any unnecessary contact. However, while Chen Linfeng conducted routine maintenance at the base, especially when caring for the potato seedlings in the Oasis module, he occasionally felt a gaze watching him through the observation window of the medical chamber. Whenever he turned around, that gaze would quickly avert. Elizabeth was observing him, trying to piece together the current situation and the true nature of this man, the only source of information. Days later, Elizabeth's strength had somewhat recovered, allowing her to lean against the bed. When Chen Linfeng brought food again, she did not immediately look away as before, but instead gazed at him directly and asked with a still weak but clearer voice, "Is it just you here?" This was both a test and a crucial question. She was confirming her safety while also assessing the other party. Chen Linfeng paused for a moment and answered truthfully, "Yes. Currently, it's just you and me in the base." He deliberately emphasized currently, hinting at the possibility of other unknown factors. Elizabeth's eyes flickered as if she had relaxed a bit, but her vigilance did not diminish. "What is your mission? Why are you at the lunar base?" "Transporting construction materials to prepare for China's lunar space station." Chen Linfeng's response was concise, revealing no further details, such as the final orders received after the nuclear explosion. Elizabeth fell silent, seemingly digesting this information and comparing it with what she knew. Clearly, their mission objectives were entirely different. Another lengthy silence ensued. Just as Chen Linfeng was preparing to leave, Elizabeth suddenly spoke again in a low voice, "Thank you for saving me." This sentence seemed to have drained her of considerable energy. After saying it, she immediately turned her head to look at the wall, her ears slightly reddening. Chen Linfeng calmly nodded in response, "You're welcome." In such situations, helping others is human instinct. He did not show excessive enthusiasm to avoid putting pressure on her, but the affirmation in his tone conveyed a basic goodwill. Their eyes met, both pausing. This time Elizabeth did not immediately shy away, but hesitated for a moment before softly asking a question unrelated to survival. "What are those green plants?" She was referring to the potato seedlings in the Oasis module. "Potatoes," Chen Linfeng replied, moving to the observation window to allow her a clearer view. "Attempting to grow food on the moon." A flash of genuine surprise and hope crossed Elizabeth's eyes. For any astronaut, achieving food self-sufficiency in an alien environment held immense symbolic and practical significance. Days passed slowly under an intentionally maintained calm. Elizabeth's injuries were recovering faster than expected due to the effects of medication and the moon's low-gravity environment. Although her fractured left leg was still in a fixed splint, the pain had significantly lessened. The cracked ribs were also healing, allowing her to breathe more easily and engage in limited activities. Chen Linfeng remained vigilant, but no longer completely isolated her within the medical chamber. After confirming that she could briefly leave medical monitoring, he allowed her to use the sanitation facilities in the living chamber and to eat in a fixed seat. The life support system of the base was primarily powered by the Swirenchi fusion reactor, but a backup water electrolysis oxygen generation system required periodic catalyst replacement. This unit was located deep within an inconspicuous equipment cabinet in the living chamber, requiring the removal of several panels to access. As usual, Chen Linfeng conducted routine maintenance, but when he used tools to unscrew the last bolt in an attempt to remove the old malfunctioning cylindrical catalyst canister, he found it stuck. He tried different angles and applied a bit more force, but the canister remained immovable, seemingly due to minor deformation or adhesion caused by prolonged exposure to specific temperature conditions. He dared not use brute force, fearing damage to the surrounding, more delicate pipes. Just as he frowned in contemplation, a hesitant voice came from behind. "Try rotating it counterclockwise by 45 degrees, then pull it outward." Canisters of this model sometimes get stuck in specific positions of the guiding slot due to thermal expansion and contraction. Chen Linfeng followed the advice, and indeed, after making the counterclockwise adjustment, the stubborn catalyst canister was successfully removed. He looked at Elizabeth with some surprise. "I've used similar backup systems on the International Space Station," Elizabeth briefly explained, and then focused her gaze on the defective canister in Chen Linfeng's hand. Based on the color and markings, this catalyst formula should be the standard version from 3 years ago. Theoretically, it should still have a considerable lifespan left, but it has failed a bit early. It might be due to the lunar dust environment, or perhaps an issue with the production batch. She unconsciously proposed an analysis, speaking entirely in the tone of a technician. Chen Linfeng felt a spark of interest. He took out a spare new catalyst canister and handed it to her. "Can you help confirm its specifications? I need to ensure a complete match." Elizabeth took the canister, her fingers skillfully gliding over the coating and parameter markings, examining it carefully. "Yes, it matches. Before installation, it's best to clean the area around the interface with high-pressure gas to prevent lunar dust particles from affecting the seal." She offered a very knowledgeable suggestion. Chen Linfeng followed her advice. During the process of replacing the new canister, they experienced their first genuine cooperation. Although Elizabeth was physically limited, her familiarity with similar systems provided critical verbal guidance and suggestions from the side, preventing Chen Linfeng from making potentially erroneous moves. The entire process was smooth and efficient. When the new catalyst canister was installed and the green indicator light for system self-check lit up, both of them breathed a sigh of relief simultaneously. "Thank you," Chen Linfeng said sincerely. "You're welcome," Elizabeth responded softly. This time her gaze did not immediately shy away. This successful collaboration was like a key that opened a door. In the following days, Elizabeth began to observe the operations of the base more proactively. She was no longer just a passive rescuer, but began to utilize her knowledge and experience to offer valuable observations. For example, she noticed that the pressure reading of a filtration unit in the water circulation system was slightly higher than normal, prompting Chen Linfeng to check it in advance to avoid potential blockages. She also suggested optimizing the LED light spectrum in the Oasis module, believing that the ratio of red to blue light could be slightly adjusted to better facilitate photosynthesis of the potato seedlings in the lunar environment. Chen Linfeng cautiously adopted some of her suggestions, and the results were indeed satisfactory. He gradually realized that Elizabeth was not merely an astronaut, but also an exceptional engineer and systems expert. Her presence was not a burden, or rather it might become a valuable asset for the survival and development of the base. One night, while recording his log, Chen Linfeng wrote, "This personal entry, lunar standard day 68. Elizabeth Shaw's injuries are stabilizing and recovering. Today's collaboration completed the maintenance of the oxygen generation system smoothly. Observe that she possesses excellent system knowledge and engineering intuition. Preliminary judgment indicates her presence may have a potentially positive impact on base operations. However, access to core system privileges and sensitive information still requires strict control. Trust must be built on shared interests and tested over time." Chen Linfeng was analyzing data from the strange metal fragments brought back from the vicinity of the Dragon spacecraft wreckage at the main control console, attempting to decipher their composition and origin. The results of the spectral analysis were exceptionally complex, revealing isotopic ratios that were extremely rare on Earth, with a crystal structure that had never been seen before. The fragment lay like a puzzle, quietly resting in the isolation analysis box, emanating a cold and mysterious aura. Elizabeth leaned against the cabin wall, slowly moving to a spot not far from the control console, keeping a respectful and cautious distance. Her gaze fell upon the complex data stream scrolling on the main screen and the magnified image of the fragment, a glint of sharp light flashing in her blue eyes. "This alloy," she gently spoke, breaking the silence. "I seem to have seen similar anomalous signals in the final flight data records of the Dragon spacecraft." Chen Linfeng paused his movements, turning to look at her. This was the first time she had actively mentioned details prior to the spacecraft's accident. Elizabeth took a deep breath, as if recalling a painful dream. The mission change was very sudden. The original low Earth orbit maintenance was cancelled, and we received an emergency directive to head to a high orbit area, supposedly to recover a fragment sample from a non-cooperative target. Her brows furrowed. Just as we approached the target area, global communications were interrupted. Then came the intense electromagnetic interference. Navigation failed. We lost control. She pointed to the metal fragment on the screen. The characteristics described for the target object are very similar to this. High density, unusual electromagnetic properties. Her tone carried confusion and fear. Our mission seems to be related to this thing. But what exactly is it? Why is it appearing on the moon? Chen Linfeng remained silent, informing her of the similar fragments he had discovered near the crash site of the Dragon spacecraft. The two clues pieced together pointed to a disturbing possibility. This unknown metal seemed to have some direct or indirect connection to the event that caused the global communication disruption and triggered their respective fates. The two shared a tacit understanding and did not delve deeper, but a sense of facing the unknown threat together silently drew them closer. In the evening, while Chen Linfeng tended to the potato seedlings in the Oasis module, Elizabeth quietly observed for a long time. Watching those green lives struggling to thrive under artificial light, she suddenly spoke, her voice calm, yet imbued with a determined strength. "Commander Chen." She used a more formal address. "My leg still needs time to recover, but my brain and hands are still functional. The Silent Sea base is our refuge, but it is too small and the resources are too limited. If we are to survive here long-term, or even wait for a faint future, we need to make it stronger." Chen Linfeng paused his actions, looking at her. The moonlight simulated streamed through the observation window onto her face, revealing a calm and resolute expression. "I have studied the base's structural blueprint." Elizabeth continued, her tone becoming professional and clear. "We have undeployed living quarters and agricultural module expansion. We have nearly unlimited energy provided by Swirenchi. We also have some usable parts and databases that may be recoverable from my spacecraft." She paused, her gaze locking onto Chen Linfeng. "I believe we should formulate a plan. A systematic long-term base expansion and resource integration plan, transforming the Silent Sea base from a mere outpost into a truly self-sustaining lunar home." Her words struck like lightning, illuminating a blueprint that Chen Linfeng had long hidden deep within, yet had not dared to contemplate due to loneliness and survival pressure. The final directive he received was build a lunar space station, but the power of one person is so limited. Elizabeth's proposal turned a vague mission into a concrete, actionable goal that required joint effort. Chen Linfeng did not respond immediately. He walked to the main control console, calling up the complete three-dimensional blueprint and resource list of the Silent Sea base. A massive holographic image floated between them, marked with various modules, pipelines, and resource points. "What specific ideas do you have?" Chen Linfeng finally spoke, his voice steady, but his eyes sparkled with ignited light. Elizabeth leaned on her cane, taking a few steps forward, using her finger to virtually trace several key nodes on the blueprint. "First, prioritize the expansion of the hydroponic farm. Potatoes are fundamental, but we also need more varieties of vegetables, and even try grains to achieve nutritional balance. Second, living space needs to be expanded to accommodate possibly increased activities and personal space. Finally, and most importantly, we need to establish a more robust resource recovery and manufacturing system. We cannot rely on Earth stock indefinitely." She spoke eloquently, showcasing the qualities of an excellent mission specialist and systems engineer. Every suggestion hit the mark with clear logic. Chen Linfeng listened attentively, occasionally posing questions or adding details. Disputes arose, mainly centered around priorities and risk control. Chen Linfeng preferred a cautious approach, prioritizing the absolute safety of existing systems. Elizabeth was bolder, believing that with fusion energy, it was acceptable to take some risks for quicker development. However, all the debates were based on technology and facts, with a shared goal to ensure the better survival of the base. Ultimately, they reached a preliminary consensus to formulate a phased Guanghan Palace expansion plan. Phase 1, consolidate the existing survival foundation, focusing on expanding agriculture and life support redundancy. Phase 2, gradually deploy living and research modules, enhancing quality of life and technical capabilities. Phase 3 may involve a more distant future, even deeper development of the moon. When the preliminary framework of the plan was recorded and archived by Annie, the atmosphere in the living module had already quietly changed. A faint but genuine trust based on a shared goal and professional recognition seemed to be truly established at that moment. They were no longer strangers coincidentally sharing a room, but rather partners beginning to work side by side for the same survival goal. Warning: detection of persistent gamma radiation and neutron flow intensity is abnormally rising. Source point location: towards the Plato ring. Annie's voice lost its usual calmness, infused with an urgent programmed tone. Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth simultaneously halted their tasks and abruptly looked up at the main control panel. On the holographic screen, a radiation dose curve was skyrocketing at an unprecedented rate, with the source coordinates precisely locked at the crash site of the long spaceship. Elizabeth's face instantly turned pale, drained of color, more so than her injuries. Her fingers gripping the edge of the control panel turned white from the strain, her voice trembling uncontrollably. "RTG. It's the radioisotope thermoelectric generator, RTG. The ship's backup power. It must have been damaged during the crash, and now the leakage is intensifying." Chen Linfeng's heart sank heavily. RTGs generate electricity from the heat produced by the decay of radioactive materials, usually encapsulated very tightly. Yet a violent crash could easily compromise its protective layer. Continuous nuclear leakage would not only contaminate that area, but more terrifyingly, if the leakage worsens, it could even trigger a critical accident or more severe pollution spread, ultimately threatening the entire Jinghai base like a dirty bomb. Leakage rate model estimation. Chen Linfeng commanded harshly. Based on the radiation intensity growth curve, the leakage source may have structural ruptures already. It is expected that within 72 to 96 hours, the radiation dose will spread to a range that could affect the safety of external operations at the base. After 168 hours, it could pose a potential threat to the internal environment of the base. Annie's report was cold and cruel. We can't wait that long, Elizabeth said urgently, knowing all too well the horrors of nuclear leakage as an astronaut. It must be dealt with immediately. Someone needs to go to the site, assess the damage, and perform emergency sealing. To go to the site, Chen Linfeng's brows furrowed tightly. This meant returning to that dangerous area, and this time facing not a moon dust trap, but an invisible and intangible, yet deadly radiation. Your leg injury does not permit that. Chen Linfeng first ruled out the possibility of Elizabeth going personally. I know, Elizabeth replied anxiously, but her gaze was extraordinarily resolute. But I am familiar with the structure of the long spaceship. I know the installation location of the RTG and the emergency procedures. I can guide you from here. This is the only way, Commander Chen. We cannot stand by and watch it destroy this place. Her words hit Chen Linfeng's heart like a heavy hammer. Yes, there was no choice. To ignore it is a slow suicide. He must go, and Elizabeth is currently the only one who can provide technical guidance. The test of trust lay before him in the most brutal and urgent manner. Should he partially entrust the safety of the base and himself to this newly established former opponent? Or should he risk losing the last opportunity for handling it due to doubts? Chen Linfeng hesitated for no more than 3 seconds. He looked at Elizabeth, whose blue eyes were filled with urgency and fear, but more so with an undeniable determination and professionalism. In the face of a survival crisis, personal suspicion seemed so insignificant. Annie, prepare the Jade Rabbit 3 and equip it with the highest level of radiation protection. Activate all radiation protection plans. Chen Linfeng decisively ordered, then turned his sharp gaze to Elizabeth. I need detailed structural diagrams of the RTG unit, of the long spaceship, possible damage modes, and all emergency sealing plans you know. Understood. I will retrieve the database immediately. All data will be synchronized to your mission term. Chen Linfeng checked and donned the specially designed heavy-duty radiation protective suit at the fastest speed, simultaneously directing the Jade Rabbit 3 into the maintenance dock, where engineering robots urgently added extra lead polyethylene composite protective panels. Elizabeth leaned against the control panel, her hands swiftly operating the data board to bring up complex diagrams of the spaceship's structure and the RTG technical manual, continuously sending key information to Chen Linfeng's helmet display through Annie. The RTG unit is located at the rear of the service compartment near the fuel pipeline. Caution: the shell is made of iridium alloy, but once the internal strontium-90 source rod is exposed. Elizabeth spoke rapidly yet clearly. The preferred plan is to use neutron-absorbing materials and special sealing glue from the emergency toolkit for temporary sealing. The toolkit may be scattered near the crash site. Chen Linfeng listened while memorizing each critical step and risk point. This was no longer an adventure he undertook alone. Every action he took would rely on the remote guidance of the woman behind him. When everything was ready, Chen Linfeng stood at the airlock door, double-checking his equipment. He glanced back at Elizabeth. She stood in the center of the living compartment using a cane, her face still pale, but her eyes were as resolute as tempered steel. Keep the communication open, Chen Linfeng said solemnly. I will, Elizabeth replied shortly. Be careful. Chen Linfeng turned and stepped into the airlock. The heavy hatch closed behind him. The Jade Rabbit 3 once again entered the eternal darkness of the moon's surface. Commander, there are still 15 kilometers to the target area. The external radiation dose rate continues to rise, currently at 300% of the safety threshold. Please confirm the sealing status of the protective suit. Annie's voice echoed. Sealing confirmed. Chen Linfeng replied briefly, his gaze sweeping across the control panels, continuously fluctuating radiation readings, the cold numbers resembling a countdown from the Grim Reaper. He instinctively adjusted the heavy protective panels added to the outside of his spacesuit. Chen, pay attention. There is a large shadow area of a crater to the 3 o'clock direction ahead, which can serve as the last observation point before approaching. Elizabeth's voice interjected as she acted as a navigator remotely, using the real-time images and terrain data sent back by the Jade Rabbit 3. The location of the RTG unit, based on the last posture before the crash, should be in the area slightly to the right below the tear in the spaceship's main body. Be sure to avoid the unstable debris hanging above as you get close. Received. Prioritize observation before action. Chen Linfeng maneuvered the vehicle into the shadow area, extinguishing most of the headlights and keeping only minimal illumination. He operated the high-magnification telescope, carefully scanning the area of the spaceship with the most severe. Indeed, near the position indicated by Elizabeth, he spotted some unusual signs. The surrounding lunar soil exhibited unnatural burning and discoloration, and the air, though in a vacuum, but detectable through particle detectors, was filled with abnormally active particle flows. Suspected leakage point discovered. Surrounding signs of high-temperature burning and contamination. Chen Linfeng reported. Describe the shape of the leakage port. Elizabeth immediately pressed for details, her tone professional and urgent. The shell is torn with irregular edges, showing signs of metal melting and solidifying. Inside, I can see the damaged shielding layer with a continuous, flickering blue light. Chen Linfeng squinted, adjusting the focus. Deep within the cracked RTG shell, a strange pale blue glow known as Cherenkov radiation was vaguely visible, a characteristic of high-energy particles penetrating a medium, visually proving the severity of the leakage. It's high-energy electrons produced by strontium-90 decay. The leakage is very severe. Elizabeth's voice carried a hint of despair. Conventional sealing glue may not fully block it. We need to find the neutron-absorbing plates in the emergency toolkit. It's a gray palm-sized composite material board. Chen Linfeng's heart sank. Searching for a specific toolkit amidst such complex wreckage is like finding a needle in a haystack, and every second spent increases the radiation dose exponentially. Any estimate the maximum time I can safely operate near the leakage point. Based on the current radiation intensity and protection level, the recommended exposure time should not exceed 25 minutes. Exceeding this limit will cause the accumulated dose to exceed the safe range, significantly increasing long-term health risks. 25 minutes. Time is of the essence. I will exit the vehicle to search for the toolkit. Elizabeth continued to guide me. Chen Linfeng did not hesitate, pushing open the hatch and stepping once again into this land of death. The safety tether reconnected, but this time he felt eyes watching him from behind. The toolkit is usually stored in the emergency box on the side wall of the service compartment. The box is bright yellow with international rescue symbols. Elizabeth's voice came through the earpiece, trying to maintain her composure, but after the crash, it could have been thrown anywhere. Start a fan-shaped search from a radius of 50 meters around the leakage point, paying attention to buried objects beneath the lunar soil. Chen Linfeng moved carefully through the rugged wreckage like a mine, clearer the beam of his helmet light, scanning every inch of the ground. Time passed second by second, and Annie reported coldly every 5 minutes. Remaining safe operating time 20 minutes. 15 minutes. Anxiety crept up like the cold lunar dust, gradually engulfing him. Just when Chen Linfeng was about to give up, preparing to risk trying to seal it directly with spare materials, his light swept under a twisted metal plate, catching a glimpse of a familiar bright yellow. Found it, he shouted, straining to move aside the debris on top and dragging out an emergency box that, though deformed, was mostly intact. Opening the box, there were indeed several gray neutron-absorbing plates and some special radiation-resistant sealing glue inside. Great. Listen, Chen. Elizabeth's voice rose with excitement. First, clear the sharp objects around the leakage port, then tightly press the absorbing plates against the rupture and begin injecting the sealing glue from the edges to ensure complete coverage of the gap. Move quickly but steadily. Chen Linfeng followed her instructions. As he approached the leakage port, even through the heavy protection, he could feel the destructive energy from the shrill sound of the dose meter. His movements were somewhat stiff from the tension, but Elizabeth's clear instructions were like a calming pill guiding his every step. The left gap is not sealed yet. Yes, just like that. Be careful of the debris hanging above. Elizabeth seemed to be there in person, remotely alerting him to potential dangers based on her familiarity with the spaceship structure. As the last neutron-absorbing plate was pressed tightly and the sealing glue slowly filled the last crack, Annie's voice sounded. 2 minutes remaining for operation. Radiation intensity monitoring. Beginning to show a downward trend. It worked. Chen Linfeng quickly retreated, leaning against the vehicle's body in the shadow of the Jade Rabbit 3, gasping for breath. The inside of the helmet was already filled with sweat. Radiation intensity is steadily decreasing. Preliminary sealing. Effective, Annie confirmed. In his earpiece, Elizabeth's long, relieved exhale was heard, even carrying a hint of choked emotion. Thank you. Thank you, Chen. Mission accomplished. Prepare for return. He drove the Jade Rabbit 3 away from this perilous place, glancing back at the gradually receding wreckage still in ruins, but the deadly leakage point had been jointly subdued by them. The U-2-3 smoothly docked into the docking bay of the Jinghai base. He did not immediately remove his heavy spacesuit, which might have been contaminated with radioactive dust, but instead followed strict purification protocols, sending it first to a dedicated isolation and disinfection chamber for processing. Only after completing all necessary cleaning steps and changing into a clean cabin suit did he truly let out a long breath, feeling the tension that had gripped him for hours finally ease. Inside the living cabin, Elizabeth still leaned on her cane by the control console, her face pale, but her blue eyes were fixed intently on the airlock until she saw Chen Linfeng walk in safely, at which point the tight worry in her gaze slowly relaxed, replaced by an indescribable complexity of emotions mingled with gratitude, relief, and a hint of release. The two exchanged a glance from a distance without speaking immediately. Radiation dose scanned past, no excessive contamination detected on the commander. Annie's voice timely broke the silence, bringing a reassuring confirmation. Thank you, Elizabeth finally spoke, her voice soft, but exceptionally clear. Thank you for taking that risk. Chen Linfeng shook his head slightly, walking to the control console to review the task data compiled by Annie. We handled the crisis together. His tone was calm, yet he acknowledged her crucial role in it. He pulled up the radiation monitoring curve, which showed that the radiation intensity in the direction of the Plato crater had indeed significantly decreased and was stabilizing. Your judgment and guidance were very accurate. This was his direct affirmation of her professional capability. Upon hearing this, Elizabeth's lips moved slightly as if she wanted to smile, but in the end she merely nodded gently and turned her gaze to the data on the main screen. Although the leak has been controlled, that RTG unit remains a hidden danger. In the long term, a more thorough solution may be needed. That's a problem for the next step to consider, Chen Linfeng agreed, then shifted the topic to another important knot in his mind. Now, perhaps we should talk about that. He operated the control console, pulling up the analysis data of the strange metal fragment brought back from near the crash site of the long spaceship. Elizabeth's attention was immediately drawn to it. She leaned closer to the screen, her brows slightly furrowed as she carefully examined the spectral analysis and structural simulation graphs. This kind of metal. Our mission objective. Her finger hovered over the flickering data points on the screen, its atomic arrangement. I've never seen anything like it. It has an extremely high density and seems to react abnormally to specific energy frequencies. I have also found similar fragments beneath the ice layer near the base. Chen Linfeng revealed this information. Both fell into contemplation simultaneously. The presence of the same unknown metal dispersed across different locations on the moon, and its possible connection to the event that caused global communication disruption deepened the mystery and unease. It does not belong to any known aerospace materials database. Elizabeth lifted her head, looking at Chen Linfeng with a searching gaze. What do you think it is? A meteorite? Or something else? Chen Linfeng fell silent for a moment and slowly said, I don't know. But its appearance seems to be no coincidence. He did not continue, but both understood the implication. This metal may have intricate ties to the disaster that led them into their current predicament. The discussion yielded no immediate results, but the act of sharing the secret itself was gradually melting the barriers between them. In the evening, while preparing a simple dinner, Chen Linfeng noticed that Elizabeth did not immediately return to the medical cabin to rest as usual, but hesitated for a moment before sitting down at the dining table. Dinner proceeded in silence, but the atmosphere was no longer awkward. After finishing, Elizabeth did not leave immediately, but gazed out the observation window at the blurry blue planet and softly said, that day, when the nuclear explosion occurred, we were preparing for the robotic arm capture drill. Suddenly, all the screens turned to static and the alarm blared painfully. Then we saw those lights. Her voice trailed off, tinged with a barely perceptible tremor. Chen Linfeng did not interrupt her, simply listening quietly. This was the first time she had actively shared her personal memory of the moment of the nuclear explosion. The last thing I heard was the mission commander screaming at us to initiate the emergency escape procedures before the communication was completely cut off. Elizabeth closed her eyes, took a deep breath, then it was chaos, spinning, crashing. When I woke up, I was already in the shattered cabin, all alone. After a while, he also spoke slowly, his voice calm, yet heavy. I was on the lunar surface watching the Earth, like a series of lights being extinguished. There were no excessive comforts, just a simple statement of facts. They were not just surviving companions, but also the last witnesses to the twilight of civilization. That night, while recording his journal, Chen Linfeng wrote down new observations. Lunar Standard Day 75. Elizabeth Shaw's injuries have stabilized and improved, and she can now participate in most daily maintenance. Her engineering knowledge has significantly improved the base's operational efficiency. The preliminary plan for the expansion of the Guanghan Palace has been jointly completed. The foundation of trust is gradually solidifying through shared labor. Note, it is necessary to begin considering resource allocation and privacy space planning under long-term coexistence. Closing the journal, he glanced in the direction of the medical cabin, the doors slightly ajar, with faint light spilling out. A strange new normal was taking shape. With one more person in the base, uncertainty and potential risk were introduced, but so were different perspectives and professional knowledge. The expansion plan for the Palace of Eternal Cold is no longer a blueprint floating on a hologram. It begins to germinate like a seed dropped into water, sprouting its first root in the hard reality of the Silent Sea base. However, this first root encounters unexpected obstacles. The first step of the plan is to activate and connect a backup habitation module to alleviate the increasingly tense spatial situation and provide redundancy for potential future operations. This module, codenamed Crown, is cylindrical and currently lies quietly in a dedicated docking bay next to the main structure of the base in an unextended dormant state. Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth stand in the docking control room, facing a complex control interface. According to the design manual, activating crown requires first loading a startup key into its core control unit through a main data bus and completing a self-check. System has identified the crown module. Starting key verification program. Chen Linfeng operated the console, inputting a long string of code. The progress bar moved slowly, then suddenly stalled at 70%, followed by a bright red error message popping up on the screen. Error code 07, a data bus verification failed. Physical layer connection interrupted. Connection interrupted. Linfeng frowned, calling up detailed schematics of the base's external structure, locating the position of the composite cable conduit that connected the main body to the crown module. Activate the external camera of the docking bay to check the data bus interface in Zone B7. The footage revealed that the critical cable conduit was covered with a thick layer of lunar dust, but at the interface there appeared to be some unnatural distortion. Upon enlarging the image, it became clear that a section of the conduit near the interface had a noticeable dent and crack, as if it had been struck by a high-speed splintering micrometeorite. Physical damage. Elizabeth leaned closer to the screen, pointing at the fine metallic-looking residue around the crack. Look at these fragments. The object that penetrated the conduit is very hard, unlike ordinary rock. And the angle is quite tricky. Chen Linfeng's mind stirred. He recalled having discovered similar inexplicable tiny impact craters while repairing the solar sail panels before. The moon has no atmosphere and micrometeorite impacts are the norm, but certain marks, indeed, seem excessively concentrated and peculiar. We must conduct an extravehicular repair to replace or fix this section of the data bus. Chen Linfeng made the judgment. This meant an unplanned, somewhat risky extravehicular operation. Elizabeth suddenly interjected, her tone resolute. Chen Linfeng paused, glancing at her left leg, which was still in a splint. Your leg. I can operate the robotic arm for precise work. Elizabeth interrupted him, her eyes shining. You are responsible for the main disassembly and installation on the lunar surface, and for the parts requiring height and precise positioning, I can complete them remotely from the robotic arm console. This is far more efficient and safer than you doing both the main work and operating the robotic arm. My leg won't affect my ability to operate here. This was a very reasonable proposal. The precise control of the robotic arm indeed requires intense focus. In the complexity of extravehicular repairs, having a reliable support for assistance would significantly increase the success rate. Chen Linfeng pondered for a few seconds and nodded. All right. But you must fully follow my instructions and stop immediately if you feel any discomfort. Understood. Elizabeth immediately leaned on her crutch and moved at the fastest speed she could manage to sit down at the robotic arm control panel, her hands skillfully placed on the control sphere and buttons, starting the warm-up and self-check procedures. Preparations swiftly unfolded. Chen Linfeng donned his extravehicular suit while Elizabeth, through the console's multi-angle camera, carefully observed the damaged data bus interface and compared it with the maintenance manual in the database, pre-planning the operational steps. As Chen Linfeng stepped onto the lunar surface through the airlock and approached the docking bay, Elizabeth's voice came through the headset, clear and calm. Chen, I see the damage point. First, remove the protective cover of the interface. Be careful of the clasp, which needs to be pressed inward before rotating to unlock. Received. Chen Linfeng operated as instructed, his movements precise. Good. Now you can see the internal pins. The 3rd and 7th pins are clearly bent and need correction. Use a precision calibration tool, keeping the angle under 5 degrees to avoid metal fatigue and breakage. Chen Linfeng carefully nudged the hair-thin pins with the tool while Elizabeth monitored in real time through the high-resolution camera, providing fine-tuning instructions a little to the left. Yes, stop. That's the position. Initially, their coordination was somewhat awkward with a slight delay between command and response. But soon the rhythm became smooth. Chen Linfeng trusted Elizabeth's god's-eye view and judgment, while Elizabeth remained entirely focused on the technical issues, her commands concise and accurate. The process of replacing the damaged cable segment was more complex, requiring the disassembly of fixed clamps, pulling out the old cable, and connecting the new one. Elizabeth operated the robotic arm steadily, handing the backup cable to Chen Linfeng's side, and when it needed to be secured, she firmly held the clamp with the arm's claw, facilitating Chen Linfeng's tightening of the screws. Watch your right rear, there's a loose thermal tile. Be careful not to scrape it. Elizabeth reminded her, observations meticulous. I see it, thank you. Chen Linfeng sidestepped. In this close cooperation, what was originally a 3 to 4 hour repair task was successfully completed in less than 2 hours. When Chen Linfeng applied the last layer of sealant at the interface, Elizabeth's voice came through the headset. All physical connections at the interface have been confirmed. You can return to the airlock for the final test. When Chen Linfeng took off his heavy spacesuit and restarted the activation procedure, this time, the progress bar smoothly reached 100%. A green prompt appeared on the screen. Key verification for the crown module passed. System self-check initiated. Self-check completed. The module is on standby and ready for docking operations at any time. Both of them exhaled in relief, simultaneously exchanging glances. This time Elizabeth no longer deliberately avoided eye contact, but slightly raised her chin, revealing a hint of pride and a faint smile. Chen Linfeng also rarely twitched the corner of his mouth and nodded. In the evening, Chen Linfeng recorded in the expansion log Lunar Standard Day 78. The Crown Habitation expansion module successfully docked and activated. Cooperation with Elizabeth Shaw was smooth, and engineering efficiency significantly improved. Initial planning has been completed. The next step will involve internal structure expansion and equipment installation. The base's living space and functionality have been substantively expanded. Note it is necessary to begin system evaluation on the feasibility of recovering the data core from the wreckage of the Dragon spacecraft. The successful integration of the Laurel module injected a new physical space into the Jinghai base, symbolically expanding the boundaries of cooperation between Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth. However, this expansion soon touched upon a deeper and more sensitive area, the sharing of information, and the key to unlocking this area might very well lie within the data core salvaged by Elizabeth from the wreckage of the Dragon spacecraft. This data core is a palm-sized black metal cube severely deformed on the outside, yet seemingly intact on the inside. It represents Elizabeth's past world and may contain valuable information about that catastrophe, the unknown metal, and even the current situation on Earth. At the same time, it is also a Pandora's box potentially containing state secrets, technological barriers, and unknown content that could undermine the current fragile trust. Chen Linfeng placed the data core on a dedicated isolation analysis interface next to the main control console. He and Elizabeth stood facing each other across the console, the atmosphere somewhat subtly stagnant. When it comes to core information, the invisible barrier reemerged. This core, Chen Linfeng spoke first, his tone calm, but laced with undeniable caution, needs to be connected to the base system for reading and repair. But before that, the highest level of security isolation and protocol review must be conducted. Annie will monitor the entire process, and any commands or codes that may threaten the security of the base system will be immediately interrupted. This is the bottom line. The system of Jinghai base is fundamental to their survival and must not be jeopardized. Elizabeth nodded, showing no signs of displeasure, but rather a hint of understanding. I understand. This is a necessary procedure. She stepped closer, pointing at an almost flattened interface on the data core. This is a dedicated high-speed data port, and its physical specifications may not be compatible with your system. Moreover, it is very likely that it has multiple encryption and self-destruct protocols set up, and forcibly cracking it could lead to permanent data loss. Do you have a way around it? Chen Linfeng asked, his gaze sharp as he looked at her. This was a test probing whether she was willing to share critical knowledge, as well as testing the depth of her technological expertise. Elizabeth pondered for a moment, the focused light of a technical expert glinting in her blue eyes. Perhaps. I need access to your Universal Interface Protocol library, and I need a standalone sandbox environment for simulated attempts. The core's underlying drive may be based on a special space branch of Linux, and if I can find a matching boot program, perhaps I can establish a read-only communication channel to initially attempt reading the logs and basic sensor data from the unencrypted area. Sure. Annie grant Dr. Shall Level 2 access to the technical database and create a fully isolated virtual sandbox environment. Chen Linfeng issued the order. This was an important concession, signifying the allowance for Elizabeth to access some non-core technical data of the base. Access granted. Sandbox environment under construction, Annie confirmed. The next few hours became a stage solely for Elizabeth. She sat in front of the auxiliary control console, her fingers flying over the virtual keyboard with complex code and protocol analysis graphs scrolling across the screen. She occasionally frowned in contemplation, quickly inputting commands for testing, fully immersed in the technical challenge. Chen Linfeng quietly observed from the side, both monitoring and evaluating. He had to admit that Elizabeth's expertise in software and system layers was extraordinarily profound, far surpassing that of an ordinary astronaut. She resembled a top-tier system architect. I found a possible handshake protocol vulnerability. Elizabeth muttered to herself, her fingers flying, using an outdated diagnostic command as a springboard, bypassing the first layer of verification. Suddenly, the interface of the sandbox environment on the main screen flickered a few times, then stabilized, displaying a rapid scroll of seemingly chaotic hexadecimal code. Connection successful. It is the underlying sensor data stream. Elizabeth's voice was filled with excitement, but immediately turned grave. However, the data packet structure is very chaotic, with numerous error checks failing, indicating that the core suffered physical damage during the crash. Chen Linfeng immediately called up the data stream analysis tool. Try to filter and reorganize the valid data packets, prioritizing the search for timestamps and key event markers. Time passed second by second. Finally, Annie's voice rang out, detected clusters of valid data packets timestamp marked as 3 minutes before the nuclear explosion to 17 minutes after. Everyone's spirits lifted. Chen Linfeng immediately commanded analyze and play back the main sensor records and communication log segments from the spaceship's black box during that time period. The code on the screen was transformed into more intuitive data curves and text records. First appeared the parameters of the spaceship systems operating normally, then at a certain moment all curves underwent a violent shift simultaneously. Electromagnetic field intensity, radiation, background, optical sensor saturation. All skyrocketed. Next, a severely distorted audio recording interspersed with the sounds of a massive explosion and alarms played out, capturing the chaotic moment that Elizabeth had previously described. Then came the terrified shouts and screams in various languages from the direction of Earth over the communication channels, ultimately fading into a dead silence. The latter half of the record captured the spaceship system's struggle under extreme failure, constant alarms of navigation failure, power imbalance, and loss of control. Finally, there was a loud, nauseating sound of metal tearing and crashing. That was the moment of the crash. The record abruptly ended here. The control room fell into silence. Although they already knew the outcome, hearing the chaos and despair of civilizations collapse with their own ears still left the two feeling a heavy sense of suffocation. Continue scanning other data areas. His voice was somewhat hoarse. Look for any records regarding the mission target, specifically that unknown metal. A deeper scan began. Deep within the severely damaged data core, Annie finally discovered some encrypted data fragments marked as the Heavenly Sword project, accompanied by some low-resolution, seemingly blurred imagery captured during high-speed passes. In the footage, a vaguely visible outline of a long, unnaturally shaped object rolling through space could be seen, whose spectral characteristics of the surface material matched the metal fragments discovered by Chen Linfeng. The Heavenly Sword project. Elizabeth looked at this code name, her brow furrowing tightly. I have never heard of this project name. Our mission briefing only stated it as recovery of non-cooperative target fragments. Chen Linfeng glanced at Elizabeth, finding her looking back at him, both their eyes filled with shock, confusion, and a shared gravity of being drawn into a colossal mystery. Chen Linfeng silently called up the blurry image data, enlarging the outline of the long object rolling in space. Annie was attempting to simulate reconstruction based on the limited spectral data and physical outline. Structural analysis shows that the object does not conform to the characteristics of any known spacecraft or rocket components. Its length-to-diameter ratio is abnormal, and the surface seems overly smooth, lacking conventional interfaces or traces of thrusters. Like a stick. Elizabeth instinctively articulated a metaphor that was not very professional, but vivid, then shook her head, or some sort of experimental weapon platform that has never been publicly disclosed. This speculation suddenly thickened the air in the control room. If the cause of the nuclear explosion was related to some sort of space weapon going out of control or conflict, the possibility exists, but there is a lack of evidence. Chen Linfeng remained calm, pulling his focus back to the data itself. The key lies in this metal. Annie, compare the spectral characteristics of the fragments we collected with the surface of the object in the footage. The match rate reached 92. It can be confirmed that it belongs to the same substance. Annie's conclusion affirmed their speculation. This mysterious metal is the target of the Dragon spacecraft mission, and it is highly likely to be the core component of the so-called non-cooperative target that triggered a subsequent series of drastic changes. Attempt to repair the deeper encrypted data, Chen Linfeng ordered, focusing on any fragmentary information regarding the object's origin, nature, or initial discovery records. Finally, they pieced together several relatively coherent but obscure textual fragments from a mass of garbled data. Fragment 1, source unknown, seemingly an internal memorandum. The orbit of the Heavenly Sword is abnormal and cannot be explained by conventional space debris evolution models. Its power source remains a mystery. It is recommended to elevate contact alert levels. Fragment 2, marked as initial assessment after contact. The material exhibits extremely high energy absorption and conversion efficiency, far beyond current technology. Potential application value and risks are both of the highest level. Fragment 3, severely damaged, only remaining fragments. Not a meteorite. Repeat. Not. Warning. Unilateral actions may trigger. Uncontrollable. This sounds like it is not describing any known space assets of any nation. Unilateral actions may trigger uncontrollable. Was the mission of the Dragon spacecraft some sort of unilateral action? And did this action ultimately trigger that cataclysmic nuclear war? Was it an accident? Or revenge? Chen Linfeng finally closed the data analysis interface, the screen darkening, reflecting the grave and weary faces of him and Elizabeth. Insufficient information. Speculation is dangerous, he summarized, his voice dry. The current primary task remains survival and building the base. This mystery requires more time and more complete evidence. I agree, she said softly, a hint of barely perceptible trembling in her voice, but we must know. What exactly? Chen Linfeng became increasingly silent. He devoted more energy to reinforcing the base's defense systems and energy independence. He repeatedly checked every redundant unit of the Swirenchi fusion reactor, expanded the monitoring range of external sensors, and even began formulating a more rigorous emergency response plan to deal with unknown external threats. Behind his actions lay a profound anxiety if the force that led to Earth's destruction did not stem from internal human conflict, but rather from some incomprehensible existence from outside. Then had the isolated Jinghai base already been targeted? Was Elizabeth's arrival along with that mysterious metal merely a part of a larger conspiracy? He could not completely dismiss this possibility, even if it sounded absurd. Thus, his trust in Elizabeth beneath the surface of their collaborative efforts was tinged with a layer of cautious. He still discussed engineering details with her, but when it came to core system permissions and long-term planning, his attitude was noticeably more cautious. Elizabeth keenly sensed this change. She understood Chen Linfeng's concerns. After all, she too was deeply shaken and troubled by the information within the data core. Yet her reaction differed from his. As a scientist and engineer, the unknown primarily ignited her strong desire to explore. She spent considerable time attempting to recover more fragments of data from the core, hoping to find more definitive evidence to comprehend the essence of Tianjin. At the same time, she began to systematically study the metallic fragments Chen Linfeng had discovered earlier beneath the ice layer, utilizing the base's limited analytical equipment to attempt to decipher their atomic structure and energy characteristics. I believe the next step should prioritize exploring the Plato crater area, Elizabeth said, pointing at the lunar map with determination. There may still be more data storage devices or sample fragments of the Tianjin scattered near the crash site of the Dragon spacecraft. That is the most direct way for us to obtain the truth. Chen Linfeng immediately shook his head, his tone unyielding. The risks are too high. The radiation background in that area is still not fully stabilized, and the terrain is complex with unknown risks of micrometeorites. The current priority is to ensure absolute redundancy in the base's agricultural expansion and life support systems. The truth can wait. Wait. Elizabeth's tone rose slightly. Chen, we may not be able to wait. If that metal or whatever lies behind it is related to Earth's destruction, understanding it might be the key to preventing the next disaster. We cannot bury our heads in the lunar soil like ostriches. Reckless actions could lead to disasters we cannot. Chen Linfeng's voice grew heavy, carrying the authority of a commander. The safety of the base is the foundation of our survival. Until we have sufficient strength, curiosity must yield to reason. The argument ended without resolution, leaving them in discontent. Trust built slowly under a common goal appeared so fragile when faced with fear beyond comprehension and differing choices. The turning point came one deep night. A secondary pump in the base's main circulation water system suddenly malfunctioned, causing irrigation in the hydroponic farm to halt. When the alarm sounded, Chen Linfeng was resting in the sleeping pod, while Elizabeth, uncomfortable due to her leg injury, was still awake in the medical pod. Chen Linfeng rushed to the control console, attempting to remotely restart the pump, but the system indicated a hardware failure. On-site repairs were necessary, and the pump was located in a narrow equipment compartment requiring the removal of several panels. Just as Chen Linfeng was preparing his tools to enter that inconvenient space alone, Elizabeth's voice came through the internal communication, tinged with a hint of weakness from pain, but remarkably clear. Chen, the control circuit board of that pump has a common design flaw, prone to short-circuiting due to moisture accumulation. Don't rush to disassemble the mechanical parts. Check the sealing of the circuit interfaces, especially whether the waterproof plug in the lower left corner is loose or has come off. Chen Linfeng was taken aback. Elizabeth could not possibly know this specific fault in advance. She was entirely making an inference based on her experience with similar system designs. Following her advice, he shone his flashlight towards the lower left corner of the pump, and indeed found a small waterproof rubber plug had come loose, exposing the interface, likely the culprit behind the malfunction. He tightened the plug again and attempted to restart it. The pump emitted a faint hum and operation returned to normal. A potential fault that would have required substantial time and effort to disassemble and repair was easily resolved due to Elizabeth's timely reminder based on her professional knowledge. Chen Linfeng stood in the equipment compartment silent for a long time. He realized that his fear of the unknown had nearly pushed a valuable companion with profound professional capabilities to the opposing side. Elizabeth may have been eager for answers, but she had never done anything to harm the interests of the base. On the contrary, her knowledge and experience had repeatedly proven their worth. He exited the compartment and softly spoke into the communicator. Thank you. Your judgment was correct. The communicator fell silent for a few seconds before Elizabeth's equally soft response came through. You're welcome. We all need this base to survive. A simple sentence, yet it revealed the essence. Regardless of what Tianjin was, and no matter how horrifying the truth, their greatest common interest at this moment remained to keep Jinghai base operational. On this fundamental goal, their positions were completely aligned. The next day, Chen Linfeng took the initiative to approach Elizabeth and spread out the lunar map again. Regarding the exploration of Plato crater, he began his tone much softer. Your suggestion makes sense. But we cannot act recklessly. I propose sending engineering robots for preliminary reconnaissance and terrain modeling first to assess specific risks and feasibility. Meanwhile, the base's expansion and priority agricultural projects will proceed concurrently. How does that sound? Elizabeth looked at him, the sharpness in her eyes softening as she nodded. I agree. Caution: robot reconnaissance is an excellent first step. One evening, after finishing his inspection of the fusion reactor, Chen Linfeng returned to the living pod and found Elizabeth sitting at the control console frowning as she stared at the scrolling code on the screen. She was still attempting to repair the data core. Any progress? Chen Linfeng casually asked while removing his tool gloves. Such daily non-task-oriented exchanges had been rare in the past. Elizabeth sighed and rubbed her temples. The encryption layer is sturdier than I expected, and it has self-destruct logic traps. Progress is slow. However, I have isolated some fundamental data fragments about the mechanical properties of that metal, indicating its fatigue strength is extremely high, which may be suitable for key structural components. She presented a data curve to Chen Linfeng. He examined it carefully and nodded. This is very valuable. It can be included in the material alternatives for future external protective structures of the base. That night, Chen Linfeng wrote in his log, Lunar Standard Day 85. The collaborative work pattern with Elizabeth Shaw has preliminarily stabilized. Roles are clear and efficiency has improved. Debates regarding the base's development have become more rational, focusing on technical path selection. Personal space boundaries are respected. Trust has been solidified under a common goal, but vigilance regarding core security must be maintained. Next priority: advance preparations for the robot reconnaissance mission at Plato crater. The new order has brought long-awaited efficiency and focus to the Jinghai base. The collaborative model between Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth, based on professional division of labor, began to operate smoothly and efficiently, like precisely calibrated gears. The first substantial external task to test this new model is to conduct preliminary robotic reconnaissance at the crash site of the Plato Ring Dragon spacecraft. The mission objective is clear: to obtain detailed environmental data around the crash site, assess the long-term stability after RTG leakage, sealing, and search for any potentially valuable data storage devices or metallic sample fragments without risking personnel. Chen Linfeng is responsible for overall command and preparation of the remote control platform for you to know. 3. He parked the lunar rover several kilometers away from the crash site on the relatively safe backside of a lunar ridge, serving as a relay communication station and mobile command post for the robots. Elizabeth remained at the base control console, focused on the final program checks and task parameter settings for the two engineering robots about to execute the mission. These two robots are codenamed Pioneer A and Pioneer B, resembling gigantic mechanical spiders equipped with multispectral sensors, high-resolution cameras, robotic arms, sampling drills, and simple sample containers. Pioneer A and B system self-check completed, all sensor calibrations passed. Elizabeth, staring at the rolling data stream on the control screen, spoke calmly and professionally. The mission sequence has been loaded. Robot A is responsible for wide area scanning and terrain modeling. Robot B will conduct close reconnaissance and sampling attempts on key suspected targets. Received. The relay signal from you to know. 3 is stable. We can depart at any time. Chen Linfeng's voice came through the communication channel, carrying a hint of metallic resonance. At this moment, he was in the enclosed cockpit on the moon's surface, distant from Elizabeth, yet closely connected through technology and a shared goal. Mission initiated. Release Pioneer A and Pioneer B. Elizabeth issued the command. On the screen, the two robots slowly descended from the rear loading platform of you to know. 3. Their 6 mechanical legs moving alternately, silently sliding into the complex terrain of the moon's eternal shadows and light. The images they transmitted were displayed simultaneously on the base control console and the cockpit screen of you to know. 3. Chen Linfeng manipulated the retractable antenna on the top of you to know. 3. Ensuring the communication link was clear while monitoring the surrounding environment, alert for any potential accidents. Elizabeth, like an experienced drone operator, closely monitored the real-time data transmitted by the two robots. Robot A reports radiation intensity has decreased by 37 compared to the last measurement and is stabilizing, but is still 50 times higher than background levels. Environmental safety level, yellow time exposure, needs to be limited. Robot B reports approaching the designated inspection area A7, a large amount of spacecraft structural debris detected. 50 meters in the right front, a suspected data recorder casing found. Partially damaged. Elizabeth quickly switched the viewpoint, magnifying the image transmitted by Robot B. A twisted black box-shaped metallic shell was half buried in lunar dust, with clear signs of impact and burn marks on its surface. Robot B attempted to clear the lunar dust around the casing and assess the integrity of the internal core. She issued the command. The robotic arm moved, deftly brushing away the dust. Preliminary scans showed severe damage to the casing with internal circuit boards exposed, seemingly hopeless. Attempt to read any possible physical interfaces or storage chips. Elizabeth refused to give up any chance. Robot B reports the robotic arm encountered unknown strong magnetic interference while clearing the A9 area. The positioning system experienced a brief deviation. Elizabeth immediately became alert. Chen Linfeng quickly turned Robot A's lens toward the area where Robot B was located. Robot A conduct a high-precision magnetic scan of Robot B's area. The scanning images quickly returned. A region with an abnormally strong local magnetic field appeared under the lunar soil, not far in front of Robot B, irregular in shape, but not large in area. It could be a deeply buried metallic object with strong ferromagnetism, Elizabeth analyzed. Robot B maintained distance and conduct deep scanning analysis with sensors. The preliminary analysis results are surprising. The magnetic characteristics of this object do not match any known aerospace alloys, but its density and signal characteristics bear some similarities to the previously discovered mysterious metal fragments, yet seem even more active. Mark this coordinate point as anomaly point beta. Chen Linfeng said solemnly, do not make physical contact for now, or simply collect lunar soil samples from the surrounding area. The unknown represents risk, especially after experiencing RTG leakage. The reconnaissance mission lasted several hours with the robots systematically scanning, sampling, and marking according to the planned procedure. They returned with a wealth of environmental data, some spacecraft debris samples, and preliminary information about the strong magnetic anomaly point, but did not find a complete readable data recorder. Robot systems are functioning normally and data acquisition is complete. Elizabeth summarized the report, her tone carrying a hint of fatigue and satisfaction after completing the task. Received. Prepare for return. Chen Linfeng controlled you to know. 3. To initiate the return journey. The samples were immediately sent to a dedicated isolation analysis chamber. The highest priority was naturally the lunar soil samples collected around anomaly point beta, as well as the trace magnetic particles contaminated on the end of the robotic arm. Elizabeth devoted nearly all her energy to the analysis work, sitting in front of the spectrometer and electron microscope, her gaze focused, as if trying to penetrate the essence of the material. Chen Linfeng coordinated the base resources, ensuring the analysis equipment was operating at full power while monitoring any potential anomalies, whether from the risks of the samples themselves or the impacts of the analysis results. Preliminary physico-chemical analysis results soon emerged, but they brought greater confusion. The composition is complex, unable to match any known alloy database. Elizabeth stared at the rolling elemental spectrum on the screen, her brow furrowed. The main components are iron and nickel, but there is an abnormally high proportion of heavy elements like iridium and osmium, and the isotopic ratios of these elements are very strange, not resembling natural formations. What about the structure? Chen Linfeng leaned closer to ask. Elizabeth called up the image from the high-powered electron microscope. On the screen, the metallic particles displayed an extremely dense, nearly perfect crystalline arrangement, but in some areas there were bizarre patterns that seemed to have been forcibly torn apart and then healed, as if subjected to unimaginable immense stress. It's as if it was manufactured but has undergone some kind of destructive process. Elizabeth's voice carried uncertainty. What's even stranger is its magnetism. Its Curie point is absurdly high, far exceeding any known material. Moreover, Annie detected that these fragments continue to emit an extremely weak, but frequency-stable low-frequency electromagnetic pulse. Spontaneous regular pulses. Chen Linfeng's heart sank. This is no longer a simple material, it seems to be active. Compare it with the fragments found under the ice layer and beside the Dragon spacecraft. He ordered. The comparison results were shocking. The metal fragments discovered in 3 locations have highly similar basic components, but the microscopic structures and radioactive isotopic decay traces show that they seem to be at different ages. The oldest is from beneath the ice layer next to the Dragon spacecraft, while anomaly point beta is the youngest and even. The decay traces indicate it may have formed relatively recently. This discovery sent a chill down their spines. It suggests that this metal is not the product of a one-time drop, but has appeared on the moon at different times in different ways. Or does it possess some kind of growth or evolution characteristics? Attempt to interpret that low-frequency pulse. Chen Linfeng's voice was somewhat hoarse. This is an extremely difficult task. The pulse signal is incredibly weak with a very low signal-to-noise ratio, and the encoding method is completely unknown. Elizabeth and Annie tried all known decoding protocols, but to no avail. It does not resemble a communication signal. It feels more like an unconscious heartbeat or a byproduct of some physical process. Elizabeth proposed a bold hypothesis. Chen, perhaps we shouldn't view it only from a physical perspective. Do you remember the energy absorption and conversion efficiency mentioned in the data core? Maybe this pulse is the result of it interacting with the external energy environment in a state we cannot comprehend. She overlaid the frequency spectrum of the pulse signal with the continuously monitored lunar background radiation spectrum and even the cosmic ray background spectrum from deep space for analysis. Through complex algorithm filtering and matching, an extremely weak but indeed existing correlation emerged. The pulse intensity of the metallic fragments seems to exhibit an inexplicable synchrony with minute fluctuations of cosmic ray background from a specific direction in deep space. That direction calculated by Annie does not point to any known celestial body within the solar system, but rather to an empty region deep within the Milky Way. The control room fell silent. This discovery has far exceeded conventional scientific boundaries, touching upon unsettling, almost science fiction realms. A non-naturally formed metal with anomalous properties that can respond to external energy, possibly even originating from deep space. If this conjecture holds, then the Dragon spacecraft's mission to retrieve non-cooperative targets and the subsequent outbreak of global nuclear war will reveal a truth too terrifying to bear. What they face may not only be the ruins of human civilization, but also a colossal existence hidden in the darkness of the universe, completely unknown. During a routine system, Chen Linfeng reached a critical point. He discovered a slight deviation in the nutrient solution ratio parameters of the Oasis module, which was originally under Elizabeth's purview. He briefly alerted her through internal communication. Elizabeth, the calcium ion concentration in nutrient solution A3 is 0.5 lower than expected. There was silence on the other end for over 10 seconds before Elizabeth's voice came through, somewhat dazed and tinged with annoyance. Calcium ions? Oh, okay. I understand. Her response was distracted, lacking the usual precision and focus. Linfeng furrowed his brow. This state was very dangerous, especially for a life support system that required a high degree of precision. He walked to the control area and saw Elizabeth still staring intently at the unsettling pulse waveform on the screen, her fingers unconsciously tapping on the table. Elizabeth. Linfeng's voice involuntarily carried a hint of sternness. We need to talk. Elizabeth abruptly lifted her head, her blue eyes bloodshot, filled with fatigue, fear, and a hint of irritable anger. Talk about what? About the possibility that we are all merely lab rats in some unknown existence's experiment. Her voice was sharp, clearly on the verge of breaking. Linfeng did not let her emotions sway him. He took a deep breath and forced himself to remain calm. What we need to discuss is now this base. No matter what that metal is, no matter what lies behind it, panic and avoidance won't solve anything. We must survive. Survive. Elizabeth let out a near sarcastic scoff. For what? To become a sample under the observation of some unknown entity. Or to be wiped out one day like garbage. To uncover the truth. Linfeng raised his voice, gazing intently at her, but also to ensure we don't collapse before the truth is revealed. Look at you now. If we lose our sanity, an order that would truly be hopeless. His words fell like a cold splash of water on Elizabeth. I am just scared. Chen. She lowered her head, her voice weakening and choked with emotion. I believed in science my whole life, trusting that everything has logic and explanation. But this, it exceeds my understanding. Linfeng was silent for a moment, his tone softening. Fear is useless. Our choices are straightforward: either be consumed by fear and sit idle, or treat this as an unprecedented problem that needs solving. He walked to the control panel, turned off the anxiety-inducing pulse signal analysis interface, and brought up the structural diagram and resource list of the Silent Sea base. Currently, we have two options. Linfeng's voice regained its commander-like calmness. First, completely seal off all research related to this metal, destroy samples and associated data, as if everything never happened, and focus on the survival and expansion of the base, living like ostriches. Secondly, Linfeng continued, his gaze sharp. We accept this unknown existence and make it our highest research priority. But strict protocols must be established. All research must occur in an absolutely isolated and safe environment. Any experiments must receive dual authorization. Research results must remain strictly confidential, and the base's defense and self-sustainability must accelerate simultaneously to cope with any potential unknown consequences arising from the research. She took a deep breath, wiped the moisture from her eyes, and her gaze regained a scientist's resolve. I choose the second. We cannot just give up without understanding. Linfeng nodded. This choice was within his expectations. All right. Then starting today, research on anomaly point beta and related phenomena, codenamed Deep I, will be classified as top secret. All research activities must strictly adhere to safety protocols. Linfeng designated a separate area within the Crown module, treated with additional shielding, as the main laboratory for the Deep I project. All research activities related to that mysterious metal, including sample storage and data analysis equipment, will be centralized here. Access requires dual authorization, and all experimental operations are meticulously recorded by Annie, but access permissions are strictly locked. Elizabeth is the main force of the research. She strictly divided her time into two parts: one part for handling the base's daily operations, and the wide cold palace expansion project, which was transparent and restored efficiency and pragmatism in collaboration with Linfeng Chen. The other part was fully devoted to the deep eye laboratory, confronting those unsettling metal fragments and bizarre data. Linfeng Chen played the role of supervisor and gatekeeper. He ensured the physical safety of the laboratory, reviewed the risk assessments of each experimental plan, and regularly checked all data records. He no longer deeply participated in the specific research processes, deliberately maintaining a certain distance to preserve objective judgment. But he would carefully read every research report summary submitted by Elizabeth, attempting to piece together the outline of the truth from those cold data. This new collaborative mode initially brimmed with a deliberate sense of alienation. Their exchanges outside the laboratory still revolved around base affairs, but they never mentioned the Deep Eye project as if it were a taboo topic. When Elizabeth emerged from the laboratory, her gaze often bore a weariness and a deep-seated contemplation, while Linfeng Chen would discreetly observe her condition, ensuring that pressure had not affected her basic judgment and operational safety. The turning point occurred on an apparently ordinary lunar day. A secondary ion exchange resin tower in the base's main circulation water system required routine replacement of its filling material. This was supposed to be a routine maintenance task, but during the replacement, a sealing ring on a connecting valve suddenly failed due to aging, causing a splash of water containing trace chemical reagents. At the time, Elizabeth was nearby, checking the sensors of the Oasis module, and rushed over upon hearing the unusual sound. Linfeng Chen also hurried over from the control panel direction. The two exchanged no words, yet synchronized as if they had practiced countless times. Linfeng Chen quickly shut off the upstream main valve to cut off the water flow, while Elizabeth, utilizing her familiarity with the pipeline structure, immediately located the position of the spare sealing ring and operated the mechanical arm to deliver the tools. The leak was soon brought under control. While cleaning up the splashed water, Elizabeth looked at the failed and somewhat deformed sealing ring and subconsciously murmured the fatigued failure of materials. Has a microscopic similarity to the stress crack propagation patterns observed in the deep eye samples. She abruptly stopped mid-sentence, seeming to realize she had touched a taboo, casting an uneasy glance at Linfeng Chen. Linfeng Chen showed no displeasure. Instead, he appeared contemplative. He picked up the old sealing ring, examined the fracture surface carefully, and then calmly said, "Every material has its limits. What matters is understanding where the limits lie and how to prevent failure." Elizabeth paused for a moment before quickly grasping his meaning. One night, Elizabeth made a new discovery in the Deep Eye laboratory. Through extremely precise measurements, she found that the metal fragments exhibited a weak frequency of spontaneous pulses while in absolute rest, which was not completely constant, but rather contained a kind of imperceptible periodic minute drift. This drift had a very long period and could not correspond to any known celestial body operating periods or the operating cycles of internal base equipment. She recorded this discovery in an encrypted log and reported it to Linfeng Chen in the next morning's routine sync, using the most neutral technical language. Linfeng Chen listened in silence, pulling up the deep space monitoring data of the base, trying to find any possible correlations. There were no immediate answers. But he told Elizabeth, "Continue monitoring, record the complete cycle. Any pattern, no matter how minute, may be a clue." In the daily health report, Annie reported to Chen Linfeng, "Commander, the resting heart rate of Elizabeth Shaw has shown a slow but steady increase over the past 7 standard days, averaging an increase of 4 beats per minute. The proportion of light sleep cycles at night has increased, while deep sleep has decreased." Chen Linfeng initially did not pay much attention. Given the long-term pressure of the lunar environment, high-intensity work, and the psychological burden brought on by the Deep Eye project, it was not surprising to experience sleep issues and slight heart rhythm fluctuations. He merely reminded during a routine synchronization, "Annie reported your recent elevated heart rate. Please rest, and do not overexert yourself." Elizabeth was then focused on adjusting the illumination parameters of the Oasis module, not lifting her head, and simply replied lightly, "Got it." It might be due to the recent data modeling being quite taxing. Her tone was calm, showing no signs of abnormalities. However, a few days later, Chen Linfeng began to notice some more subtle changes. When entering and exiting the laboratory, Elizabeth occasionally exhibited a brief and almost imperceptible motion of supporting herself against the door frame. During meals together in the cafeteria, she seemed more easily fatigued than before, and on 2 occasions, she even appeared distracted while eating. The most evident instance was during a task that required the two of them to adjust the angle of the external sensors. While operating the robotic arm control console, Chen Linfeng noticed her fingertips exhibiting slight involuntary tremors. "Are you all right?" Chen Linfeng couldn't help but ask, his brow slightly furrowed. Elizabeth quickly withdrew her hand, clenched it into a fist, and then loosened it, forcing a slightly strained smile on her face as she said, "I'm finer. It might be due to the prolonged exposure to low gravity, causing some muscle fatigue." She immediately redirected the topic back to work. The pitch angle of the sensor needs to be adjusted by another 2 degrees. Chen Linfeng chose not to press further, but his doubts lingered. He pulled up more detailed health monitoring data and found that in addition to heart rate and sleep, Elizabeth's blood pressure also showed slight fluctuations, and her temperature regulation seemed more sensitive than before. These symptoms were all quite mild and seemed insignificant individually, but together they pointed to some potential progressive physiological issues. He approached the control console to check, but unexpectedly noticed that the indicator light for the deep eye laboratory was on. Was Elizabeth still working this late? He retrieved the surveillance records at the laboratory entrance and discovered that Elizabeth had entered about 2 hours ago and had not come out since. A sense of foreboding surged within him. He stepped outside the laboratory and called through the communicator, "Elizabeth, is everything normal in the laboratory?" There was no immediate response. A few seconds later, Elizabeth's voice came through slightly breathless and clearly fatigued. "Normal. I am almost done." Her voice was off. Chen Linfeng hesitated no more and entered his access password to open the outer door of the laboratory. Elizabeth was sitting in front of the analyzer, her face appearing abnormally pale under the cold light of the screen. Beads of sweat dotted her forehead. One of her hands was propping against the edge of the operation table, seemingly struggling to maintain her balance. Upon seeing Chen Linfeng enter, she instinctively tried to stand but swayed dangerously, nearly falling. Chen Linfeng quickly stepped forward to support her. In that moment, he felt her arms' muscles slightly spasming and her body temperature was higher than normal. "What exactly is wrong with you?" Chen Linfeng's voice turned serious, carrying an undeniable question. Elizabeth attempted to break free, but was too weak. She lowered her head, remained silent for a moment, and finally stopped hiding it, her voice trembling with a hint of helplessness. "I'm feeling dizzy. It happens often lately, especially after prolonged focus. And sometimes I can't see clearly, there are flashes in front of my eyes." These symptoms had surpassed the realm of mere fatigue. He immediately half-supported and half-carried Elizabeth out of the laboratory and towards the medical pod. The preliminary vital sign scan results came out quickly: abnormal fluctuations in blood pressure, slight signs of slowed nerve conduction speed, and the eye fundus skin showed mild signs of papilledema. The combination of symptoms suggests increased intracranial pressure. Annie provided the initial medical assessment. The cause is unknown. It may be related to the long-term microgravity environment, radiation accumulation effects, or specific metabolic disorders. Further diagnostics are needed, including cerebrospinal fluid pressure testing, but the base currently lacks the necessary equipment. The conclusion was clear and severe: Elizabeth was ill, and it was a condition that was difficult to diagnose and treat in a lunar environment. He took a deep breath and issued instructions to Annie. Activate the continuous monitoring mode of the medical pod. Prioritize stabilizing her vital signs. List all available medications and treatment plans that may alleviate symptoms. Inside the medical pod, there were only the rhythmic beeps of the vital sign monitor and Elizabeth's occasionally heavy and faint breaths. She lay on the medical bed, eyes tightly closed, her brow furrowed from the continuous pressure in her head, her complexion pale to the point of being nearly transparent. Routine medications to stabilize vital signs had already been administered via intravenous drip into Elizabeth's body, but the effect was limited. Annie assessed the trend of the condition and the worst-case scenario. Chen Linfeng's voice was low. Based on the existing symptom data model, if intracranial pressure continues to rise without effective intervention, the patient may experience insufficient brain tissue perfusion within 48 to 72 hours, leading to irreversible neurological dysfunction and even the risk of brain herniation. The mortality rate will significantly increase. 72 hours. Chen Linfeng's fists clenched silently. Time was not on their side. The medical capabilities of the Jinghai base were designed for common emergencies encountered by astronauts in orbit, and they were virtually powerless against such complex intracranial pathologies. His gaze swept over the simple equipment and medicine cabinet in the medical pod, ultimately landing on a sealed box in the corner marked Dragonfly Emergency Supplies. Inside were medical supplies and equipment recovered from Elizabeth's crashed spacecraft that had yet to be thoroughly inspected. Hope coexisted with risk. He hurried over, input his access password, and opened the box. The items inside were messy, some damaged in the crash. He quickly rummaged through them, his heartbeat accelerating. Finally, in a shock-absorbing foam compartment, he found his target: a portable intracranial pressure monitor and a set of accompanying emergency antihypertensive drug injection pens. The equipment appeared to be largely intact, but no one could guarantee that it would function normally after experiencing violent impacts and months of inactivity, nor whether the medications had expired or mutated. Using them was akin to gambling. Inaccurate readings could lead to misjudgments, ineffective medications, or side effects could hasten death. But if he did not use them, Elizabeth might not make it. Chen Linfeng picked up the lightweight, yet heavy equipment and returned to the bedside. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to calm down. Now he was not a soldier nor a commander, but someone who needed to make medical decisions in a desperate situation. Annie scanned the external structure of the monitor and assessed its physical integrity. Analyze the packaging integrity and expiration date of the drug injection pen. I need as much information as possible to assist in decision-making. Scanning complete. The monitor's shell shows no obvious cracks, and the interface is free of rust. The external packaging of the drug injection pen is intact, but it has exceeded the marked expiration date by 3 months. The chemical stability of the internal medication cannot be guaranteed. Expired medication. The risks had increased. Just then Elizabeth seemed to be disturbed by their conversation, slightly opening her eyes, her gaze unfocused and pained. She saw the equipment in Chen Linfeng's hands, vaguely recognizing it. As the medical supplies equipped on the spacecraft, her lips moved slightly, emitting a weak sound. Risk. Hi. Even in her haze, she maintained an astronaut's instinctive caution towards risk. With determination set, Chen Linfeng's gaze became sharp and resolute again. He turned toward the control console and quickly issued commands. Annie, prepare for a sterile operating environment. Bring up all technical data and usage procedures for this model of intracranial pressure monitor and antihypertensive medication. I need real-time guidance. Environment preparation in progress. Data has been retrieved. Chen Linfeng put on sterile gloves and carefully cleaned the skin around Elizabeth. Following Annie's guidance, he located a thinner area on the squamous part of the temporal bone and gently attached the sterile probe's fixing base. He held his breath throughout the entire process, his movements gentle, unlike one accustomed to operating heavy machinery. Probe contact confirmed. Attempting to activate the monitor. Annie prompted. Chen Linfeng pressed the start button. The instrument's screen flickered a few times, and actually, after a brief self-calibration, a series of numbers began to jump, finally stabilizing at a value, 25 millimeters of mercury. The reading exceeds the upper limit of the normal range, 20 millimeters of mercury, confirming increased intracranial pressure, Annie confirmed. Although the equipment was old, the readings matched the clinical symptoms, increasing their credibility. Now came the most critical step in administering medication. Chen Linfeng picked up the expired antihypertensive drug injection pen, took a deep breath, and carefully verified the dosage, aiming the pen tip at the muscle injection site on the outer thigh of Elizabeth. Elizabeth, he said softly, as if telling her, and also himself, I'm going to administer the medication. There may be some risks, but we have to try. Elizabeth seemed to have heard him, her eyelashes fluttered, showing no signs of resistance. Chen Linfeng no longer hesitated and steadily pushed the medication in. Then he immediately turned his gaze to the monitor screen. Seconds ticked by. At first the readings showed no significant change. As Chen Linfeng's heart began to sink, the numbers on the screen started to decrease very slowly. 24, 23, 22. The medication was taking effect, and there were no immediate signs of allergic or toxic reactions. He had made a choice and earned Elizabeth. Several hours after the drug injection, the declining trend in the values was encouraging, slowly decreasing from a dangerous 25 millimeters of mercury to the edge of 20 millimeters of mercury. Elizabeth's breathing seemed to stabilize a little, and the tightly knitted brows slightly relaxed. Every 10 minutes, Annie automatically reported comprehensive vital sign data. Heart rate 88, oxygen saturation 98, blood pressure 12,580, body temperature 37.8, slightly elevated. A slight fever. Was it a drug reaction or a precursor to infection? Chen Linfeng's heart tightened. He got up, dipped a sterile cotton swab in a small amount of saline solution, and gently moistened Elizabeth's cracked lips, then checked the intravenous infusion line for patency again. He dared not leave, merely leaning back in his chair, closing his eyes for a brief rest, yet his ears remained like the most sensitive radar, capturing any changes in the rhythm of the monitor. A faint moan startled him awake. He immediately leaned over and saw Elizabeth's eyelashes flutter a few times as she slowly opened her eyes. Her gaze was no longer as scattered as before, though still weak, it had a focus. She first looked dazedly at the ceiling, then her gaze slowly shifted, landing on Chen Linfeng's face, filled with exhaustion and concern. Chen. Her voice was so hoarse it was almost inaudible, laced with uncertainty and confusion. I'm here. Chen Linfeng immediately responded, his voice slightly hoarse from prolonged silence, yet exceptionally gentle. How do you feel? Is your head still hurting? Elizabeth slightly moved her head, seemingly feeling it out, then nodded very faintly. It's better. It feels like something is pressing down, but it's not as tight anymore. She attempted to move her arm, brushing against the infusion line, and a flash of understanding and complex gratitude crossed her gaze. Did you use the medicine from the spaceship? Yes. The situation was urgent, and there were no other options. Chen Linfeng replied, honestly, not hiding the risks. The monitor shows that the intracranial pressure has decreased, but observation is still needed. She opened her mouth as if wanting to say something, perhaps, thank you, or inquire further details, but in the end it transformed into a long, trembling exhale. Some emotions, after rolling over the edge of life and death, rendered words pale. Annie. Chen Linfeng turned to the control panel, perform a comprehensive assessment of the patient's current condition. Vital signs are stabilizing. Intracranial pressure is maintained at 18 millimeters of mercury. Neurological reflex tests are preliminarily normal. It is recommended to continue bed rest, closely monitor, and maintain fluid and electrolyte balance. Hearing Annie's assessment, Chen Linfeng's heart, which had been hanging in the air, finally settled back to half. The most dangerous juncture seemed to have been temporarily passed. 2 days later, Elizabeth's spirit had obviously improved a lot, and she could stand briefly with assistance. Looking out at the still blurred outline of Earth, she suddenly said softly to Chen Linfeng, "Chen, if I don't make it, what will you do?" Chen Linfeng was momentarily stunned, then answered in his usual pragmatic tone, "Handle it according to the plan. Then continue executing the Guanghan Palace project." Elizabeth turned her head to look at him. A faint yet genuine smile appeared at the corners of her mouth. "I knew you would." She paused for a moment, her voice softer, yet resolute. "Thank you. Thank you for not giving up on me." Chen Linfeng did not respond to her gratitude, but turned his gaze toward the deep darkness outside the window. The crisis seemed to have passed, but they both understood that the cause of Elizabeth's illness had not been identified, and the long-term effects of the lunar environment on humans remained a huge question mark. As her physical strength gradually recovered, Elizabeth began to participate more deeply in the affairs of the base. She no longer merely provided suggestions, but sat alongside Chen Linfeng at the main control panel, jointly examining the holographic blueprint for the expansion of the Guanghan Palace project. This time their discussion was no longer a cautious game of probing and maintaining boundaries, but genuinely focused on how to build this home better and more sustainably. "I believe the docking node of the second living module can be optimized." Elizabeth traced a virtual pipeline on the blueprint with her finger. "If we rewire from here, although the initial workload may be larger, in the long run, energy efficiency will increase by at least 15% and will also be easier to maintain in the future." Chen Linfeng carefully examined her proposal, pondering for a moment before nodding. "That makes sense. But we need to assess the impact on the stability of the existing structure." Annie, simulate the structural stress changes of this modification plan. Simulation in progress. The plan is feasible and the structural safety factor remains within the design redundancy range. Annie quickly provided a response. "Good, adopt this plan," Chen Linfeng decisively decided. This efficient and goal-aligned decision-making process was inconceivable in the past. They even began to discuss some more long-term and even luxurious plans. For instance, in the expanded agricultural module, besides necessary food crops, could a small area be designated to try planting some ornamental plants with psychological healing effects? Or when future energy becomes more abundant, could a more comprehensive small entertainment or learning database be established to cope with the potential psychological erosion from years of isolation? These discussions transcended the survival baseline and touched upon the quality of living. Though the realization seemed far off, merely planning and imagining injected a hint of human warmth and hope into this cold metal fortress. One day, while examining the lunar soil sample data brought back from Anomaly Point Beta, Elizabeth pointed at an unusual trace element peak and thoughtfully said, "The enrichment of this element is usually associated with high temperature and high pressure geological activity. Perhaps there are signs of geothermal activity at the bottom of Plato crater that we are unaware of." Chen Linfeng immediately became alert. Geothermal means energy, but it may also imply geological instability. This needs to be included in the long-term exploration goals, but priority should be placed after energy and safety. "I agree," Elizabeth nodded, "but this is a direction worth monitoring. Perhaps there are more secrets hidden on the moon." During the systematic exploration and assessment of the resources surrounding the base, their gaze shifted from the essential needs of water and energy to the deeper mysteries of the moon itself. The opportunity arose from an exploration mission to a small impact crater located to the northeast of the base. The primary objective of this mission was to investigate whether the area contained high-purity silicate minerals for future attempts at simple glass or ceramic manufacturing to replace or repair some non-core components of the base. Chen Linfeng piloted the U-23, equipped with improved exploration devices capable of shallow drilling and real-time composition analysis. The initial progress of the mission went smoothly. They successfully collected several mineral samples that met the criteria. However, while attempting deep sampling of a crater wall, the drilling sensors returned anomalous data. "Commander, the drill bit has encountered an exceptionally hard rock layer at a depth of 17 meters. Annie's voice echoed in the cockpit. "The resistance has increased sharply, and the composition analysis indicates atypical lunar basalt characteristics. The density is unusually high, and it contains rare Earth element spectra not marked in the lunar database for this area." Chen Linfeng immediately halted the drilling and pulled up the real-time data stream for a closer inspection. Elizabeth, at the main control console of the base, also received the data simultaneously. Her voice came through the communication channel tinged with surprise. "Chen, look at the isotopic ratio of neodymium and europium. This does not conform to the standard model of lunar mantle-derived magma differentiation. It resembles something formed under extreme high-pressure conditions and rapidly cooled. Some kind of special product. Extreme high pressure. Chen Linfeng furrowed his brow. Lunar geological activity has long ceased. Where would such an extreme high-pressure environment come from? Unless it was remnants of an ancient energy-rich impact event. Mark this coordinate point. Attempt a small-scale geological radar scan to see the distribution range of this anomalous rock layer. Chen Linfeng commanded. The shallow geological radar atop the U-23 activated, sending probing waves into the ground. The feedback images gradually began to construct themselves on the screen. The results indicated that the anomalously high-density rock layer was not an isolated spot, but presented an irregular, roughly circular area with a diameter of about 2 kilometers, resembling a massive patch embedded beneath the lunar crust, with its bottom depth difficult to detect. The structure does not resemble a naturally formed magma intrusion or impact melt pool. Elizabeth analyzed the radar images remotely. The edges are too distinct, and the internal structure seems to show signs of layering. Can you enhance the signal penetration? Current equipment power is limited. We cannot probe deeper structures, Annie replied. This discovery greatly piqued their curiosity. A geological structure hidden beneath the lunar surface, both in composition and structure, was exceptionally unusual. What was it? How did it form? Upon returning to the base, they immediately conducted more detailed analyses of the collected core samples. The results were even more perplexing. The rock not only contained anomalous isotopic ratios, but also revealed under the microscope some extremely tiny mineral inclusions exhibiting regular geometric shapes, a form usually found only in laboratory synthesized materials or under extremely specific natural conditions. This is certainly not ordinary lunar rock. Elizabeth stared at the image from the high-powered electron microscope. Her tone firmed. The processes it underwent were very special. Perhaps the history of the moon is more complex than we imagined. Chen Linfeng pulled up the global geological map of the moon, trying to find records of similar structures. The Sea of Tranquility, where the base is located, is a vast lunar sea on the near side of the moon formed by ancient volcanic eruptions of basalt. Theoretically, the stratigraphic structure is relatively simple. But this newly discovered patch is clearly an anomaly. Any search all Apollo program data, lunar orbital probes, and our own remote sensing data, focusing on whether there are gravity anomalies, magnetic anomalies, or thermal flow anomalies in the Sea of Tranquility region. Chen Linfeng realized that this might not be an isolated phenomenon. The cross-comparison results were shocking. About 300 kilometers southeast of the Sea of Tranquility base lies an area named Aristarchus Plateau, which has long been observed to have faint intermittent radon gas releases and anomalous thermal radiation signals, often explained as residual radioactive element decay or solar wind impact effects. However, comparing the geological map of that area with the newly discovered patch structure revealed a certain vague similarity in their subsurface structural models. Even more unsettling was when Elizabeth compared the trace element spectra of that anomalous rock with previously discovered unidentified mysterious metal fragments. Although the main components were entirely different, a statistically significant correlation was found in several extremely rare trace element ratios. This cannot just be a coincidence. Elizabeth murmured, a chill creeping up her spine. This metal may be linked to some special geological structure deep within the moon. A terrifying hypothesis emerged in their minds: that mysterious metal might not simply be an extraterrestrial object that fell to the moon from space. Could it be related to some unknown ancient and profound secret of the moon? Does the moon's interior hide truths that humanity has never touched, far beyond imagination? Inside the Sea of Tranquility, base-time seemed to take on a new texture. To truly build the future, they must cross a critical energy threshold, safely and stably transmitting the surging energy of the Swirenci fusion reactor to every corner of the base in need of development. This is not just a technological upgrade. It is an announcement, a declaration to this desolate wasteland: humanity is here not just to survive, but to take root. The Energy Backbone Network Upgrade Project is finally ready for system integration. Chen Linfeng's voice resonated in the control room, steady as usual, yet carrying a hint of barely perceptible gravity. On the holographic screen, the light strips representing the newly constructed superconducting energy pipelines lit up like veins from the core area of the Swirenci, winding towards the Crown Habitation Module, the expanding Oasis Agricultural Zone, and the future planned research module interfaces. Elizabeth stood in front of the auxiliary control console, her fingertips gliding over the virtual interface, conducting the final data verification. Her blonde hair shimmered softly under the cold light of the screen, her gaze focused and sharp. All node capacitor buffer charging statuses confirmed. The magnetic field constraint stability parameters fall within optimal range. Backup fuse system redundancy tests passed. She looked up, briefly meeting Chen Linfeng's gaze. No words were needed. they both saw the determination and anticipation in each other's eyes. "We can begin at any time, Commander." This address of Commander at this moment sounded more like a ceremonial confirmation affirming their absolute responsibilities in their respective positions. "Initiate the countdown." Chen Linfeng issued the order. "Countdown begins 10-9-8. The cold electronic voice echoed within the chamber. Chen Linfeng's fingertips hovered above the dual authentication physical switch on the main control console. Elizabeth's hand was also placed on her side's authorization sensing area. 3-2-1. Energy pathway activated. The two pressed the confirmation key simultaneously. In an instant, a deep humming sound seemed to rise an octave, becoming more resonant and powerful. The lighting fixtures atop the living module flickered slightly before stabilizing the brightness, seemingly enhanced by an indescribable degree, the light becoming purer and more stable. On the main control console, the data streams representing energy consumption from various regions began to pulse vibrantly, as the previously slightly diminished energy readings from distant modules surged to standard levels, as if injected with a booster. The most immediate change was evident outside the observation window. New high-power floodlight arrays installed outside the base lit up in sequence, their blazing beams tearing through the eternal darkness of the lunar surface, illuminating vast areas around the Sea of Tranquility base as bright as day. The silvery exterior of the base, the crisscrossing pipelines, and the distant rugged ringed mountains all displayed unprecedented clarity and detail in that moment. This human island had never shone so brightly, so resolutely embedded in this vast gray canvas. The energy backbone network is operating stably. Output power at 100, efficiency at 98.7. All modules connected normally. Annie's voice sounded calm as ever, but with a hint of a simulated satisfaction wave. They succeeded. There were no cheers, no high fives. Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth merely watched the rolling green data on the screen, listening to the steady heartbeat of the base, its powerful heart pulsating beneath their feet. It was not merely powering light bulbs, but injecting fundamental energy into all future possibilities. Larger-scale agriculture, more advanced life support systems, deeper scientific research, and even the dream of returning to Earth one day. Elizabeth took a deep breath, as if for the first time truly inhaling the air of the future. She turned to Chen Linfeng, her face blossoming with a genuine smile, shedding all burdens, her blue eyes sparkling. "We have lit up the moon, Chen." Chen Linfeng gazed out at the illuminated land, his expression deep. "This is just the beginning," he replied, his voice low, yet carrying a steely conviction. "The core of the expansion lies in the substantial enlargement of living space." The residential extension module, codenamed Laurel No. 2, is a cylindrical chamber that had long been delivered but remained sealed due to energy and priority issues. At this moment, it was being slowly dragged out of the storage dock by engineering robots approaching the second docking port reserved in the main structure of the base under the precise guidance of No. 3. The docking process was smoother than the first time. Chen Linfeng oversaw the entire operation from the main control console, monitoring the calibration of the docking ring, the pressure of the buffering mechanism, and the stress changes in the entire base structure. Elizabeth focused on the activation sequence inside the Laurel No. 2 module, directing the engineering robots to unlock the internal structure fasteners one by one and activate the life support subsystem. Docking ring capture confirmed. Structural locking sequence initiated, first phase completed. Internal air pressure of Laurel No. 2 is stable, balanced with the main base. Begin deploying internal partition walls. A series of concise and efficient commands were transmitted and executed. Through the internal cameras, one could see the originally compact tubular space of Laurel No. 2 slowly unfolding like a metallic flower, with prefabricated wall panels extending along the rails, dividing the space into several independent lounges, a small shared activity area, and even a space reserved for a future upgrade into a simple bathroom. Though still basic, it was a world apart from the previous situation where everyone was crammed into the core living. When the final internal structure locking click sound was transmitted through the sensors, Elizabeth's voice, tinged with a hint of tired excitement, rang out. The deployment of Laurel No. 2 is complete. All systems pass self-check. The living area has expanded by 70%. Chen Linfeng sighed deeply as he looked at the three-dimensional structural diagram on the screen, which marked a significant expansion of the base. He stood up and said to Elizabeth, "Let's go take a look at our new home." The two of them entered Laurel No. 2 through the connecting airlock, one after the other. The air carried a faint scent unique to the new composite materials and the fresh air system. Soft adjustable color temperature LED lights illuminated every corner, no longer the purely functional lighting of the core cabin. The independent lounge, though small, offered precious privacy. The activity area even reserved interfaces for securing tables and chairs. Elizabeth walked to the observation window of a lounge, where the exterior view showcased the brilliantly lit lunar surface. She gently touched the cold window frame and murmured, "It feels Finally, a bit like a place where one can breathe. We should also try to establish a small as diverse as possible ecosystem, Elizabeth explained while planting seeds not only for nutritional balance, but also for long-term psychological stability. Seeing different plants grow can effectively alleviate the psychological fatigue brought about by a monotonous environment. Chen Linfeng agreed with this view. He was responsible for adjusting the light cycles and nutrient solution ratios to ensure the environmental needs of the new crops were met. Watching the tender green seedlings break through the soil under artificial sunlight juxtaposed with the thriving potato seedlings nearby, a faint vitality, named hope, indeed quietly sprouted in the cold metallic chamber. The third focus of the expansion was the budding industrial capability. Utilizing the ample energy provided by Suerin, they initiated a small-scale 3D metal printing system. The initial products were merely some simple tool replacements and structural fasteners, yet their significance was profound. This meant they had begun to possess a certain manufacturing capability, not merely repairing and consuming stock. Elizabeth even attempted to assemble a simple experimental device for crushing lunar soil to extract minerals using the printed parts. Annie pulled up the water resource consumption and replenishment data for nearly 30 standard days. The data charts were generated rapidly. The consumption curve rose steadily, while the replenishment amount aside from the initial collection was nearly zero. The net storage curve resembled a snake sliding into an abyss, firmly extending downward. Based on the current consumption rate and the efficiency of the recycling system, it is expected that after 68 standard days the total water storage of the base will drop below the critical value required to maintain minimal life activities. Annie's report was cold and precise. 68 days. Less than 2 Earth months. We must conduct the second ice water collection as soon as possible, Elizabeth immediately pointed out, and this time it cannot be a tentative small-scale collection, it must be a systematic large-scale operation to establish a stable supply line. Chen Linfeng nodded in agreement, but his gaze grew deeper. The resource point 1 on the edge of Shackleton Crater has limited reserves and is over 40 kilometers away from the base, making the round trip time-consuming and energy-intensive. We need a better solution. He pulled up the complete lunar polar map and pointed to the deeper marked area of permanent shadow within Shackleton Crater. According to early orbital remote sensing data, the water ice reserves at the bottom of the crater may be several orders of magnitude richer than those in the edge areas. But the environment there is extreme, with lower temperatures, more complex terrain, and greater risks. But the rewards are also greater. Elizabeth interjected, her engineering mind racing. If we can find a stable, high-abundance vein of water ice at the bottom of the crater and establish a semi-automated collection and transportation system, we can solve the water resource problem once and for all. On the eve of departure, Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth conducted a final mission rehearsal in front of the console. The massive, three-dimensional model of the crater hovered between them, the deep pit resembling the gaping maw of a beast. Remember safety first. Elizabeth looked at Chen Linfeng. Chen Linfeng donned the heavy extravehicular suit, checking every interface. Understood. The base is in your hands. You two know. 3 moved cautiously like a careful miner, slowly descending the inner wall of Shackleton Crater along the pre-planned zigzag route. Based on the coordinates of the suspected enrichment area marked by early remote sensing data, you two know. 3 finally stopped in a relatively flat area at the bottom of the crater. Chen Linfeng operated the onboard multispectral scanner and geological radar to conduct detailed exploration of the surrounding area. Scanning in progress. The water ice signal in the shallow layer 0.5 meters is weak, but at a depth of 10 to 15 meters underground a strong and continuous hydrogen element anomaly signal appears. Annie's voice carried a hint of urgency as she processed the data distribution range. Preliminary estimate exceeds 2 square kilometers. The signal purity is extremely high. In the base control room, Elizabeth looked at the striking blue area presented on the screen, almost jumping up in it. Chen, did you hear that? The reserves far exceed expectations, and they are relatively concentrated. Chen Linfeng immediately selected the point with the strongest signal and began operating the onboard drilling equipment. The heavy drill bit slowly rotated, penetrating the frozen lunar soil as hard as steel. The drilling process was much more challenging than on the lunar surface, as the low temperature and extreme hardness posed a significant test for the equipment. As the drilling depth increased, the resistance data transmitted by the drill suddenly changed when it reached 12 meters. Simultaneously, the spectral curve on the real-time composition analyzer surged sharply. The drill bit has reached the high-purity water ice layer. Chen Linfeng reported, his voice unable to contain his excitement. He carefully extracted a segment of rock core sample. When the sample was lifted to the lunar surface, illuminated by the vehicle's lights, one could clearly see large crystalline ice bodies embedded in the rock core, almost devoid of impurities. Sample visual confirmation purity extremely high. Elizabeth, seeing the sample through the high-resolution camera, spoke with a slightly trembling voice. Due to excitement, immediately conduct a rapid on-site composition analysis. The analysis results soon came out. The purity of the water ice reached an astonishing 96 or more, far exceeding samples from the edge areas. That's fantastic. Elizabeth could hardly contain her joy. Chen, we found it. This is enough for the base to operate for decades, even hundreds of years. After the immense joy came a more rational assessment. Chen Linfeng manipulated the engineering robots to begin sampling and drilling at multiple nearby points to confirm the distribution range and stability of the vein. The results were exhilarating. This was a high-quality water ice deposit with a massive reserve and relatively uniform distribution. However, during one drilling operation, when the robot was clearing the loose soil around the drilling point, both Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth noticed an anomaly almost simultaneously. About 20 meters beneath the water ice-rich lunar soil layer, the geological radar scanned a small but extremely well-defined object reflecting signals that were entirely out of place with the surrounding natural geological structure. The signal revealed a standard rectangular shape with sharp edges. What is that? Elizabeth's voice was filled with suspicion. It can't be naturally formed. Chen Linfeng immediately focused the scan on that area for higher precision detection. The signal remained clear. The dimensions of the rectangular object were approximately 3 meters long, 1 meter wide, and 2 meters high, quietly lying deeper in the rock layer beneath the water ice vein. Material density, extremely high. Structural reflection characteristics, completely different from lunar rock or water ice. Analyzed it cannot match any known components of human spacecraft or probes. A more complex and disturbing emotion than discovering the water ice vein suddenly seized both of them. In this deepest place of eternal night on the moon beneath the source of life, buried, was an obviously non-natural, unknown object. What is it? Who left it? Why is it here? What does it have to do with the abundant water ice deposit? Is it a coincidence, or some kind of connection? The ecstasy was replaced by immense questions. They had not only found a treasure to sustain their survival, but seemed to have touched upon a deeper, older secret hidden beneath the lunar polar abyss. Chen Linfeng silently operated the robotic arm, carefully collecting lunar soil and ice layer samples from above the mysterious object that might be influenced by it, meticulously recording its precise coordinates and all scan data. Mark this coordinate point as Abyss Archive. He ordered solemnly, his tone grave. Collect enough water ice samples and prepare for return. The U-23 slowly returned to the Jinghai base, carrying high-purity ice samples collected from the Shackleton crater abyss, along with a heavier and more unsettling mystery. The samples were quickly sent to a specially expanded water treatment and storage module. As the first batch of purified clear water was injected into the redesigned water storage tank of the base, the bar graph displaying water resource reserves on the control panel surged dramatically, as if under a spell, surpassing the glaring red warning line with unprecedented speed and steadily approaching the maximum capacity. A tangible sense of abundance fundamental to survival quietly dispelled the long-standing concerns about water scarcity that had pervaded the base. The water resource crisis has been resolved and announced calmly. The current reserves can sustain the base's dual operation standards for at least 15 Earth years, and if circulation efficiency is further improved, the duration will be significantly extended. Elizabeth stood before the refreshed water circulation control panel, looking at the healthy green data on the screen. She let out a long sigh of relief, her face lighting up with a genuine smile of relief. She turned to Chen Linfeng, her blue eyes sparkling with ease. We did it, Chen. At least for now, we are free from the... Chen Linfeng nodded, his gaze sweeping over the filled water tanks and the stable water treatment system, a heavy stone lifting from his heart. Water is the lifeline, and the stability of this line means they have a more solid foundation to face future. However, his thoughts quickly turned to the regular rectangular shadow that was brought back along with the life-sustaining water buried deep beneath the ice. With ample energy and a stable water source, they greatly expanded the Oasis agricultural module. New hydroponic tanks were activated, and a greater variety of crop seeds were carefully sown. Elizabeth seemed to have been revitalized by the improved environment. She took the initiative to optimize the automated management of the hydroponic system, designing a more refined irrigation and nutrient supply algorithm. In her spare time, she even attempted to create a simple non-contact sensor to measure plant growth status using the limited materials in the base's inventory. One evening, the base's simulated sunset system bathed the living pod in a warm glow. The two, rarely busy with specific work, sat in the Guiguan 2 activity area with food before them that was no longer bland paste, but simple dishes made from freshly harvested potatoes and vegetables. Elizabeth poked at a few green leaves in her meal box with a small fork, suddenly laughing quietly and shaking her head. I never expected that eating food I grew myself on the moon would feel so happy. Chen Linfeng silently chewed his food. The simple taste was indeed more comforting to the soul than any nutrient paste. He looked out the window. The outline of the Earth remained blurred against the distant starry backdrop, but the lights inside the base were warm and steady. However, tranquility was ultimately short-lived. Once the basic survival pressures eased, the question from the abyss inevitably surfaced. A few days later, Chen Linfeng called Elizabeth to the main control panel. He brought up all the scanning data and high-definition images regarding the mysterious rectangular object retrieved from the bottom of the Shackleton crater. Chen Linfeng's voice was low and serious. "We need to talk about this." Elizabeth looked at the sharp-edged, clear outline on the screen, which was incongruous with the chaotic geological structure around it, her expression growing grave. "It is directly beneath the water-ice vein. This cannot be a coincidence." She took a deep breath and performed data comparison. Match the dimensions, proportions, and reflection characteristics of this object with all known spacecraft components, probes, and even common geological shapes of craters in the database. Comparison complete. No matches found. The length-to-width-to-height ratio of this object is approximately 1:330:67, which is not a common industrial standard ratio. Its surface radar reflectivity is extremely high and uniform, indicating that the material is extremely dense and has a simple structure not matching any known composite materials or natural rock layer characteristics. Anna's report ruled out the most obvious possibilities. Silence enveloped the control room. It was neither a human creation nor a natural formation. Then what is it? Attempt to analyze the geological age of the rock layer it resides in. Chen Linfeng issued a new directive. Based on the isotopic dating model of the water ice deposition layer above and the surrounding basalt, the time the object has been buried is extremely ancient. Preliminary estimates suggest it predates any human space activity, possibly even predating the emergence of Homo sapiens. Elizabeth's face instantly turned pale. She instinctively took a step back, gripping the edge of the control panel, her voice trembling with disbelief. How is this possible? Could it be that there was already something before humanity? She couldn't finish that word, but the possibility had already engulfed the two like a cold tide. Extraterrestrial civilization. Prehistoric visitors. Either explanation would be enough to overturn humanity's understanding of its own place in the universe. Chen Linfeng forced himself to remain calm. He recalled fragments of information about the Tianjin project in the data core, that metallic substance of non-current technology, and this ancient artifact buried beneath the moon. The clues seemed to point to an increasingly clear and terrifying answer. This matter is classified as top secret with the highest priority for the Deep Eye project. Chen Linfeng's voice was somewhat hoarse from extreme restraint. No physical contact attempts must be made in any form until we have sufficient strength and ensure absolute safety. Elizabeth nodded heavily. Powered by the stable output of the Swirenchi fusion reactor, efficient and silent operations were underway. Lunar Standard Time sleep cycle. The lighting in the living pod had been adjusted to night mode, leaving only various control panels and indicator lights emitting faint glows illuminating the cold, orderly metallic walls. Chen Linfeng was asleep in his rest compartment, with physiological data seamlessly monitored by and all parameters stable. Elizabeth was in the independent research pod of the Guiguan 2 module, attempting to repair data on a partially damaged high-density storage unit recovered from the wreckage of the Dragon spacecraft, while a cup of long-cold synthetic caffeine drink sat beside her. However, amid the seemingly constant operational noise, and the artificial intelligence core of the Jinghai base was processing a massive stream of real-time data at nanosecond speed. Her perception spanned every corner of the base, from the subtle fluctuations of the Swirenchi plasma confinement field to the photosynthetic efficiency of every crop leaf in the Oasis module to every cosmic dust impact data relayed by the external lunar surface sensors. Suddenly, an extremely subtle anomaly triggered a high-level mark in her underlying monitoring protocol. It was not a device malfunction nor an environmental mutation, but a kind of resonance. In the redundant monitoring circuits of the base's main energy distribution network, a series of extremely high frequencies and low amplitudes appeared, presenting strict mathematical patterns of harmonics. These harmonics superimposed upon the stable 60 Hz base frequency, like an invisible yet precise ripple thrown into a calm lake, and immediately initiated the first-level analysis program. She first ruled out the possibility of interference from internal devices. The fusion reactor was running smoothly, and all power converters were operating at efficiencies above 97, which could not produce such a noise pattern. She simulated all known lunar environmental interference sources, micrometeorite impacts, solar wind particle flows, and even potential geological activity from afar, but none matched the spectral characteristics. The anomalous resonance persisted, unsettlingly stable. Alert: unidentified energy network resonance detected. Source external. Anna's calm, synthesized voice echoed simultaneously in the rest area of Chen Linfeng and Elizabeth. Chen Linfeng almost instantly woke up, his military instincts making him sit up straight, his gaze directed at the communication panel by his bedside. Report details. His voice was hoarse from just waking, but clear and decisive. Elizabeth also set down the tools in her hand, her brow furrowed, quickly walking to the control panel of the research pod. The holographic screen lit up before them with and visualizing the data analysis results. Against a nearly straight energy output curve background, a group of amplified and highlighted rhythmically pulsing, high-frequency harmonics was clearly visible. The resonance frequency is 1.28 terahertz with an amplitude below the baseline by 0.0003, currently having no effect on network stability. Preliminary localization analysis shows that the energy disturbance is not conducted through cables, but rather propagates through the lunar surface medium to the base's foundation, coupling into the energy network. And reported surface conduction. Elizabeth caught the key point, quickly operating on the virtual keyboard to pull up the lunar geological structure map. The wave of this frequency attenuates rapidly in lunar soil. The source's energy level may not be high enough to produce detectable coupling effects, but it must be very close, or its emission mechanism is extremely peculiar. Chen Linfeng's gaze sharpened. Source coordinates. Triangulation is underway. Current data points to the southwest of the base, but the margin of error is large. We need to activate the external seismic wave sensor array for auxiliary localization, and replied. Authorization to activate. Initiate all available monitoring modes, focusing on that frequency band. Chen Linfeng ordered. A warning bell rang in his heart. This was not a natural phenomenon. Something was attempting to touch or detect his base in an extremely covert manner, whether on the lunar surface or beneath it. Elizabeth retrieved all external sensor logs before and after the resonance appeared, including radiation magnetic fields and gravity gradients. No significant changes accompanied by other physical parameters. The target seems only interested in the energy network, or rather only detectable through this means. A few minutes later, Anna's further report brought more unsettling news. Commander Dr. Xiao. Preliminary localization results have converged. The resonance source is not located on the lunar surface. According to the waveguide model inversion, its source depth is estimated to be 3 to 5 kilometers deep beneath the base. A silence fell over the living pod. Beneath the lunar crust. Continue monitoring and record all data. Do not actively send out any probe signals unless necessary. Chen Linfeng's voice was low, and raised the base's defense level to yellow alert. Reassess the security of all external interfaces. Directive confirmed. Monitoring program priority has been elevated. Defense status has been adjusted and responded. Activate the entire base's seismic wave sensor array set to active detection mode, covering the resonance frequency band and its harmonics. Chen Linfeng stood before the main control panel, his voice calm, his commands clear. Directive confirmed. Active seismic wave array initialization. Pulse generator charged. Anna's response came immediately. Outside the base, several precision sensors originally used to monitor lunar tremors altered their operating modes from passive listening to active knocking. Low-energy, specific frequency mechanical vibration waves were injected beneath the lunar surface, beginning to outline the geological structure of the moon like sonar. Elizabeth sat at the sub-control panel, rapidly sliding her hands across the virtual interface, adjusting the scanning parameters. Focus on the southwestern quadrant of the base, set scanning depth to 10 kilometers, prioritizing resolution. And construct the real-time stratigraphic acoustic impedance model. Model in construction. Data stream reception stable. The holographic screen began to clarify the previously blurry lunar underground structure at an astonishing speed. Different densities and compositions of rock layers were assigned different colors, presenting a complex profile. The scanning beam acted like an invisible scalpel, layer by layer, dissecting the lunar soil and bedrock. Surface lunar soil layer structure normal. At a depth of 800 meters, expected ancient impact fill found. At a depth of 1.5 kilometers, basalt layer interface clear. Elizabeth closely monitored the data stream, softly voicing key findings, but so far everything remained within the predicted range of the geological model. Chen Linfeng's gaze was locked onto the approximate area representing the energy resonance source, highlighted on the screen as a flashing red dot at a depth of about 3 to 5 kilometers. Suddenly, an anomaly appeared in the core area of the constructed three-dimensional model. Wait. Elizabeth's voice suddenly rose, in the depth range of 2.7 to 4.3 kilometers. Strong, regular geometric superposition patterns of sound wave reflection signals appeared. This is not a natural layer. On the screen, against the deep blue background representing homogeneous basalt, an extremely complex net structure composed of countless sharp lines and regular angles abruptly emerged. It was not an isolated object, but a massive structure resembling a honeycomb or circuit board, seemingly composed of numerous regular hexagonal and rectangular units, its scale far exceeding previous imaginations, horizontally extending to almost cover the entire area beneath the Jinghai base and infinitely extending to the southwest. Structure dimensions. Preliminary estimates indicate a lateral span exceeding 15 kilometers with a vertical thickness of about 1.6 kilometers. Geometric regularity confidence at 99.98. Annis report carried an almost absolute certainty. Material analysis. Chen Linfeng pressed his heart, pounding heavily in his chest. This is definitely not a geological phenomenon. The reflection signal intensity is extremely high, indicating that the structural density far exceeds that of the surrounding basalt. The sound wave attenuation pattern is abnormal, suggesting the presence of numerous cavities or special media inside, unable to match any known mineral or artificial material database. Annis' response implied they were facing a completely unfamiliar substance. Elizabeth quickly retrieved the previous abnormal resonance data and performed a superimposed analysis with the geometric features of the underground structure, and perform a Fourier transform matching of the resonance frequency with the unit sizes of this net structure. The calculation results presented instantly. The frequency of the anomalous resonance corresponds perfectly to the fundamental unit sizes within this massive net structure, forming a perfect physical resonance relationship. This is no coincidence. Elizabeth took a deep breath, her eyes filled with shock and excitement. As a scientist, that resonance is the heartbeat generated by the periodic activity of this underground city or machine. What we captured was its energy leakage during operation. Chen Linfeng stared at the awe-inspiring yet unsettling massive artificial structure on the screen. It lay quietly in the depths of the moon, grand in scale and intricate in structure. Its very existence had already overturned humanity's entire understanding of the moon. Can we determine its function? What is the energy source? Chen Linfeng's voice was low. Insufficient data, Commander, and replied, the structural scale far exceeds our detection depth, its full extent unknown. The energy source may be located deeper or utilize geothermal or other unknown means, but it can be confirmed that the structure is currently in an extremely low power state, and the detected resonance may merely be the background noise maintaining basic operation. Background noise. A background noise from a massive underground facility comparable to a city can be captured by the base's sensitive sensors. What would it look like when it operates at full capacity? Chen Linfeng was silent for a moment before issuing a new directive, and marked this structure as Jinghai Underground Anomalous Structure, codenamed Hive. Encrypt and archive all scanning data at the highest confidentiality level. Continue monitoring any slight changes in its resonance signal. Directive executed.